a group of people surrounded Jong in a dimly lit room. They tore him apart piece by piece while he remained conscious through the agony. His bloodied face twisted as he rolled his eyes, the image of a smiling girl surfacing in his fading vision. She calmly stated that since she was the one who had convinced him to open the door, she deserved an extra share of the spoils. One man presented her with Jong's severed hand. At that moment, Jong realized just how foolish he had been. Rage twisted his features into a grin. If there was life after death, then those responsible would pay for what they had done, 100 times over. Suddenly, he gasped and sat upright. The room was unfamiliar, modest, and intact. He blinked and realized he had woken in an apartment, whole and alive. Confusion settled in his expression. Could those monsters have failed to kill him? He glanced at the calendar and noted the date, November 12th. A grim realization struck him. 1 month remained before everything turned to ice. Jong stepped out onto the balcony. Cold wind brushed past him as he scanned the horizon. The thought crept in, had he returned to the past? In December 2050, a massive meteorite had collided with Earth, triggering a global climate disaster. Temperatures dropped to between 60 and 70 degrees below zero. A blizzard raged for more than a month, burying entire cities in snow and ice. Countless species perished. Humanity faced near extinction. He clenched his fists. In his previous life, he had survived only because he had prepared supplies in advance. Despite that, those same monsters had stolen everything and left him to die. Now, with time on his side, Jong resolved to protect himself and gather enough resources to survive, and to take revenge. He stepped out of the room, already planning. Food alone would not be enough. He needed weapons too, something that would help him fend off those who would come to steal and kill. While deep in thought, he blinked and rubbed his eyes. A strange sensation overcame him. Within seconds, his surroundings changed. He stood in an entirely new dimension, empty and vast. His mind reeled at the discovery. This space could hold an unimaginable volume of resources. A grin crossed his face. If he could transfer a food warehouse here, he would never run out of supplies. The thought of it made his stomach growl. Sunlight reflected off tall buildings as Jong walked through the city, savoring its brief normalcy. Soon, all of it would be buried under frost. Before then, he planned to enjoy things he wouldn't be able to taste in the coming years. He entered a luxurious restaurant and sat at a grand table. Plates of gourmet food arrived, and he devoured them without hesitation. The waiter watched, stunned by the sheer volume Jong consumed. Tears welled up in his eyes as he chewed. In the future, people would beg for instant noodles. Now, he was dining like a king. After the meal, he stepped outside. A doorman handed him a VIP card, thanking him for the large bill. 2 nearby girls took notice. Kai Ning, with her sharp eyes, nudged her friend Yu Qing and remarked that her loyal puppy had turned out to be a walking fortune. Despite the joke, Yu Qing harbored her doubts. Perhaps Jong was not as poor as he once claimed. Yu Qing blushed as she approached him. She asked how he had ended up there. Jong's expression darkened. Behind her innocent appearance, she had once betrayed him. Her actions had directly led to his death. He remembered how his ribs had been turned into soup. Still, he held back and picked up his VIP card, stating he was heading to a store. Privately, he considered the opportunity. He needed manpower, and if these two could be used as free labor, then all the better. When he mentioned his plan, the girls quickly agreed to come along. They claimed they were also heading to the store. Soon, they arrived at a large supermarket. The girls pushed carts, glancing at him curiously. They questioned whether he was preparing for a camping trip. Why else would he need so much food? Jong picked up several bags and replied that anything could happen. He just wanted to be ready. As they checked out, one of the girls frowned and suggested that he should treat them to dinner for helping him. Jong replied with a polite smile. He claimed he was too busy but promised to treat them next month. Kai Ning, unimpressed, asked why someone with so much money would bother doing all the shopping himself. She also accused him of being stingy despite his wealth. Yu Qing smiled gently, assuring Jong not to take her words to heart, explaining that she was simply tired. She took her friend's hand and commented on how kind he was. Jong turned away, brushing it off without concern. They returned to his apartment complex, where he approached the cashier and swiped his card. Lowering his head, Jong considered that people might think he had gone mad. It no longer mattered. The only thing he cared about was avenging the betrayal that led to his death in his previous life. A woman nearby, holding a child, observed his towering stack of food supplies. Doubt clouded her expression as she questioned whether he intended to gorge himself while leaving others to starve. The woman smiled and asked if the delivery was new. The girls accompanying Jong clarified that all the items belonged to him, they were merely helping carry them. The old woman turned to Jong and asked if he really intended to leave her without anything. Her child reached for a chocolate bar, managing to pick one up. Jong snatched it back and stated that the items were his. The child's face twisted in fury, and he began screaming that if Jong didn't return the candy, he would kill him. Jong raised his hand, warning the boy to remain silent if he didn't want to be punished. The woman's expression darkened with shock. She questioned his judgment, asking how someone his age could speak that way to a child. She extended her hand, offering to pay for the candy later. Jong instead handed her his phone and said that if she wanted it, she needed to pay immediately or go to the supermarket herself. She stared at him in disbelief. As he walked away, she shouted that she was the head of the apartment's management committee and promised that he would regret his actions. They soon exited the elevator and approached his unit. Before closing the door, Jong stated that he would invite them over next time. The door slammed shut behind him. Once alone, he activated spatial magic. First, he transferred all provisions into his personal storage dimension to test how well it worked. Afterward, he planned to sort everything and begin sourcing medicine. Examining his supply list, he recognized the need to secure heating and reinforce insulation. The apartment needed to become a steel fortress against the impending cold. Resting his chin in his hand, he noted that acquiring cold weapons like crowbars or axes was still feasible, although he had no clear path to obtaining firearms. He sank into the couch, calculating that he still had a month left. If money ran short, he could always sell off his assets. Morning arrived. Sunlight glinted off the windows of the surrounding buildings. Jong summoned several food items from the spatial dimension. The vegetables and meat remained fresh. However, the fish he had stored were now lifeless. He concluded that living creatures could not survive in that dimension due to its unique time distortion. This realization prompted a new idea. If fresh food stayed preserved, he could begin experimenting with cooked meals. He picked up his phone and called a catering company, asking to speak directly with the manager. He told them he wanted to organize a grand 3-day banquet for his friends. After hearing the scale of the request, the manager informed him that it would cost no less than $1 million, requiring a $200,000 advance payment. Without hesitation, Jong transferred the amount. Then, he retrieved his property documents, aware that currency would soon become worthless. There was no reason to hoard cash in a collapsing world. He visited a loan office. After negotiating, his bank account reflected a balance of $6 million. Jong studied the figure, knowing that even after mortgaging the house his parents had left him, the total remained insufficient. If the banquet cost exceeded $1 million, the remaining funds might barely cover the fortress upgrades. However, there were other expenses to consider. Weapons and medical supplies were still missing from his plans. Despite all his efforts, the money was not enough to cover everything he needed. A man suddenly called out from behind Jong, offering the services of his company. Jong turned toward him, keeping his tone calm as he questioned whether the man had the authority to handle such large sums. They stood between two tall buildings, and Jong explained that if the company assisted with the funds, he would repay the amount within 3 months. The man assured him that this would not be an issue, claiming that their company specialized in such transactions. Soon, they arrived at the company's office. A blonde employee approached the director and informed him of Jong's intention to take out a loan. The director turned his attention to Jong and began asking questions regarding the loan. Jong stated that he would repay it as quickly as possible and was unconcerned with the interest rate. The director replied that the interest stood at 40%. If Jong borrowed $5 million, he would need to return $7 million. Without hesitation, Jong signed the contract. However, the director added that a valuable item must be presented as collateral before the funds could be released. Jong frowned, then handed over a set of documents. He explained that his house was worth over $5 million and could be used as collateral. Additionally, he mentioned owning a car valued at $300,000, which they could also claim if he defaulted on the loan. The director reviewed the documents and calmly responded that the house was worth only $4 million at most. He expressed uncertainty about approving a $5 million loan under these conditions. Jong's expression changed as he pleaded for help, insisting that he desperately needed the money. The director remained firm, explaining that it was not worth the risk. Jong refused to back down and urged them to approve at least $4 million, promising to repay $7 million. The director, after a moment of thought, took the documents and agreed to make an exception for him. Despite the apparent success, Jong reflected on how dangerous such loans were. However, With 1 month left until the world descended into chaos, he doubted anyone would survive long enough to demand repayment. As Jong walked out of the office, the staff began murmuring amongst themselves. They believed he was insane and had no chance of repaying the debt. Yet they agreed that a client with such potential could not be ignored. Jong entered his car, considering them quite generous for providing the funds. When he checked his phone, his account showed a balance of 9 million. Sometime later, he sat in the reception area of one of China's largest security firms, sipping coffee while studying the interior. This company provided protection for politicians and celebrities alike. Jong frowned, recalling that in his previous life, he had heard of a billionaire's son who spent over $1 billion building a private shelter. The idea that such wealthy individuals existed in the same world still amazed him. A man in a suit soon approached and introduced himself as Wu Hai, the commercial department manager. Jong greeted him and stated that he needed a secure shelter capable of withstanding the end of the world. Wu Hai sat at the table without hesitation, assuring Jong that their company could meet his requirements. Jong examined a sheet of diagrams and pricing. The plans included video surveillance systems, reinforced bulletproof glass, and armored doors. He studied the page carefully, setting his goal to transform his home into an unbreachable steel fortress. Wu Hai handed over an additional blueprint while noting that many wealthy clients prioritized security, making Jong no different in that regard. The manager explained that the house's location and size were irrelevant. Once the enhancements were complete, it would become a true stronghold. He pointed at the design and mentioned his background as a former mercenary, which gave him useful insights into structural defense. Jong's eyes widened at the mention of Wu Hai's experience. A smile appeared on his face as he leaned forward and asked whether Wu Hai could also provide firearms. Jong held his head, trying to justify his sudden interest in acquiring weapons. He explained that he had been involved in a scuffle on the road, where some men had threatened him. From what he saw, they appeared to be carrying machine guns. Across from him, the manager listened with his eyes closed. Although he had connections, that did not mean he should assist someone he barely knew. Eventually, he stood and informed Jong that construction would take around half a month. If an opportunity to help came up, he would reach out. Jong smiled quietly to himself, then decided to visit the hunting club, which he considered the most reliable place to acquire bladed weapons. He arrived at a shooting range, where a girl made a remark about traveling to Africa. She advised him to ensure he had proper gear and to prioritize his safety. Jong stepped out of his car and assured her there was no need for concern since he would be traveling with friends. He promised to use his new equipment responsibly. Inside his vehicle were a crossbow and several arrows. He considered himself fortunate to possess a hunter's license. If anyone questioned his possession of the crossbow, bow, or hunting knife, he would have a valid explanation. While standing near the car, he heard movement and turned to see a man commenting about the large number of items being brought in. The man noted that such a delivery must have required the owner's permission. Jong waved them in, explaining that the delivery was for him. The man glanced at the many trailers and noted there was enough food for 1,000 banquet tables. Nearby, a group of girls watched and assumed Jong was wealthy. Yu Qing, smiling to herself, believed he truly was rich and told herself not to let him lose interest in her. Jong made a hand signal, instructing them to take everything to the warehouse. He would handle the rest. Behind him stood a girl he recognized. He thought to himself that it was better for her to remain confused for now. Once she realized the truth, he planned to deal with her personally. Inside, a man informed Jong that a banquet's worth of food for 500 tables had arrived. Surrounded by boxes, Jong began transferring them into his personal space. He imagined himself lying atop the mountain of food, envisioning how he could feast for the rest of his life without worry. The following day, several workers moved around his apartment, clearing and packing. Some neighbors paused to watch, confused about his recent behavior. Only a few days earlier, Jong had dragged home 3 shopping carts filled with groceries. Meanwhile, Jong was in touch with the manager, who informed him that someone could provide a firearm in 3 days. However, the cost was steep. Jong extended a fist toward one of the workers, assigning them to complete the task while he relocated to a hotel temporarily. Walking down the corridor, he thought about how, within a month, everyone would recognize who truly understood the situation. His next stop was a meeting with manager Jo K. Jong explained that he needed assistance, emphasizing that his sister and her husband were both executives at a large company. He raised a finger, offering double the standard rate and promising there would be no losses. Jo K agreed, approving a 20-day leave and confirming that the items would be delivered the next day. Jong expressed his gratitude and confirmed he would transfer the money immediately before leaving the office. Outside, he stood facing the warehouse, satisfied that it now held enough food, tools, and essential supplies to sustain at least 1,000 people. Placing a cap over his head, he reminded himself that it was time to find a secure shelter. At this point, there was no room for mistakes. Jong walked past a room where Jo Peng, a red-haired man, stood inviting Yu Qing to a concert. Yu Qing adjusted her hair, thanked him politely, and explained that she already had a date. Jo Peng pointed toward Jong and complained that he had forced the girl to help carry his things. His tone was filled with indignation as he mentioned that Yu Qing had come to work with a sore back and should not be troubled with such tasks again. Jong glanced at her, realizing she had already shared everything. Yu Qing then approached and explained that it was only a mild ache. Jo Peng demanded that Jong pay $500 for a doctor. However, Jong replied calmly that she had offered her help, he never requested it. Tension rose as Jong asked Jo Peng who he thought he was to issue orders. Jong turned his back. Jo Peng leaned toward Yu Qing and warned her to stay away from him, claiming Jong had acted wrongly. Yu Qing stared at Jong's retreating figure and noticed how different he seemed. He no longer behaved like his old self. Something about him felt off. Later at the hotel, Jong stepped out of the shower and checked his phone. Yu Qing had messaged him, expressing concern over his recent behavior. She mentioned his excessive purchases and how distant he had become. Her message ended with a note about feeling lonely due to their lack of communication. Meanwhile, Yu Qing frowned at her phone, disappointed that Jong had ignored her message. Beside her, Kai Ning commented that Jong had been acting strangely. She wondered aloud about the reason behind the huge amounts of supplies he had gathered, including hosting a banquet as if preparing for an end. Yu Qing asked whether it was possible that Jong had discovered something important and was getting ready. Kai Ning laughed and replied that if anything serious was approaching, there would already be public announcements. She rubbed her shoulders and suggested they remain calm. Stocking up like him, she added, would only draw ridicule. 1 week later, Jong stood with a gun in his hands. Holding the weapon gave him a sense of reassurance in case the world truly began to collapse. A courier arrived with a package. Jong signed the delivery form, satisfied that the emergency medications he had ordered had finally arrived. These were essential supplies he knew he would need. After handing over the paper, Jong mentioned that there were more items he needed to order. The courier smiled and asked where the next delivery should be sent. Jong glanced at him and responded that he would personally take him there, since he was heading to the same place. A man in a suit informed Jong that everything had been completed according to his specifications. The interior had been lined with insulation sheets, each 20 centimeters thick. He added that the new ventilation system could filter out any harmful gases, making it secure against chemical attacks. Furthermore, the thermal insulation had been redesigned following the standards used in Arctic research facilities. With the furnace installed, the room could retain up to 99% of its heat. They stepped onto the balcony, where Wei explained that the glass was fully bulletproof, stronger than the alloy panels covering the exterior walls. The design also allowed enough natural light into the room, enabling clear visibility of the surroundings. Adjusting his glasses, the manager mentioned the installation of 300 surveillance cameras throughout the building, allowing full monitoring of each floor. Jong shook his hand and expressed satisfaction. The manager, confident in their work, assured him that the shelter would meet all his expectations. As the man left, Jong watched his back disappear down the corridor and quietly admitted to himself that he regretted not being able to test it all for real. A faint smile appeared on his face, though he remained unsure whether he would survive what was coming. Leaning on the balcony railing, he observed the arrival of the final supply shipment. A large water truck was parked below. Jong understood that in a long-term crisis, water would be the rarest and most critical resource. As he descended to supervise, whispers spread among onlookers. People noted how he had made structural changes to his home and was now stockpiling water. One man approached and asked why he needed so much. Jong remembered how Uncle Yu had once sacrificed his last supplies to save a mother and child during a desperate winter. That act of kindness had cost the old man his life. Jong had not forgotten it. He leaned closer and whispered that this year's temperatures were forecasted to drop abnormally low. According to reports he received, the coming winter would be brutal. He advised Uncle Yu to begin stockpiling food and water to avoid suffering when prices surged. Uncle Yu stroked his chin, asking if the information could be trusted. Jong placed a hand on his chest and said he had prepared thoroughly. If Uncle Yu was hesitant, he could start with just instant noodles and bottled water. Before a response came, another man pulled Uncle Yu aside and warned him not to believe Jong. In his view, those who encouraged stockpiling were trying to manipulate others. Uncle Yu shouted back, telling Jong not to take those words seriously. Jong remained calm, thinking to himself that his responsibility was only to share what he knew. Whether others believed him was their choice. Jong spent the rest of his time training and preparing. He allocated the last of his funds to gather supplies and took daily trips to practice using firearms. At one point, he also purchased a bow and began learning archery. In the evenings, he exercised rigorously, aiming to stay in peak condition. Later, at work, he dropped a dissolvable pill into a glass. He planned to arrive early, avoid suspicion, and later slip sleeping agents into everyone's tea. After preparing a tray, he distributed cups and encouraged everyone to take a break. The workers, tired from the day, gratefully accepted and began drinking. Jong also drank his share to avoid suspicion. As expected, the effects began setting in within 30 minutes. One by one, the others fell asleep. He checked their condition carefully, then moved swiftly to collect everything he needed while the building remained silent and still. Jong walked through the warehouse, confirming to himself that all equipment had been powered down. With that step complete, he moved on to the next phase. Stretching out his hand, he activated his spatial magic. Crates vanished from their positions one by one. A small smile appeared on his face as he continued, thinking it would be easier to relocate everything first before organizing it later. Efficiency grew with each repetition. Jong realized that at this rate, he could empty the entire warehouse without assistance. After some time, he stopped to catch his breath and acknowledge the effort he had put in. Nearby, a pallet caught his eye. It held smaller boxes that looked unfamiliar. Opening one, he discovered cold-resistant clothing, likely from the 2050 line of advanced thermal technology. He recognized its value immediately and flushed with a mix of surprise and satisfaction. He scanned the now empty warehouse and concluded that with this volume of supplies, even an ice age would not pose a serious threat. Confidence settled in his chest as he took a sip of water, reflecting on how unbelievable it would seem that one person had moved all of this alone. Lying down beneath one of the storage racks, he told himself that he only needed to endure a little longer. Once the moment passed, his secret would fade into the countless unknowns of the coming freeze. Time passed quietly until someone began shaking him. A voice called out urgently, claiming that something serious had occurred. Jong opened his eyes and asked for details. He was informed that their entire warehouse inventory had vanished. He sat up quickly, feigning shock, and widened his mouth as though completely unaware. Clutching his head, he muttered to himself, wondering how such a large quantity could disappear so fast. A phone was handed to him. The caller was the director. Jong answered, greeted by an angry voice demanding an explanation. The goods were gone, and rumors were spreading. Jong held the phone close, stating that the cause remained unknown. He claimed that during the short break, everything had vanished within 2 hours. His expression shifted to disbelief as the director shouted back, accusing him of betrayal. Jong stood with his back to his colleagues, silently questioning his next move. The idea of turning himself in briefly crossed his mind, though he quickly dismissed it. A calm smile formed on his face as he responded to the director, reminding him that he lacked the ability to transport that much cargo alone. Lifting his head, Jong suggested they bring in the proper authorities, since resolving the issue internally would be difficult. The director responded with a stern look and mentioned that he would escalate the matter to the general manager for further handling. Jong turned toward the others and relayed the director's decision. He explained that specialists would soon arrive to investigate, so there was no need for panic. Placing a hand on one colleague's shoulder, he reassured him that falling asleep during the incident did not imply guilt. Sunlight reflected off the iron door as Jong later sat inside a police station. An officer thanked him for his cooperation. Standing by the entrance, Jong listened as the officer advised him to report anything suspicious and avoid leaving the city for the time being. Jong nodded and confirmed he had no intention of going anywhere. Television screens nearby displayed urgent news coverage of a large-scale robbery at a local warehouse. The broadcast identified the incident as having occurred on December 10. Jong glanced at the calendar on his phone and noted that only 2 days remained. Catching his own reflection on the screen, he noticed a snowflake drifting across the surface. He looked up to see fresh snow beginning to fall. Crowds moved hastily around him while he remained still for a moment. Eventually, he began walking, acknowledging that within 2 days the world as they knew it would come to an end. On the morning of December 12th, the sky lit up with an unnatural glow. A celestial explosion caused temperatures across Earth to drop rapidly, unleashing global devastation. Jong stared out the window. Snow blanketed every visible surface, stretching across the lifeless landscape. He reached for a glass of water, watching ice form at the edges. The moment had finally arrived. Jong stared out the window as snow continued to fall. He sat on the sofa and lifted a glass of water to his lips. In the apartment group chat, several residents expressed frustration about the sudden change in weather. Glancing at his phone, Jong calmly noted to himself that this was only the beginning. He stepped onto the balcony and observed the heavy snowfall. In his mind, he estimated that the snow would persist for at least 3 months, with temperatures continuing to plummet. A group of girls stood near the building taking cheerful photos in the snow. Jong looked in their direction and quietly thought that their excitement would not last long. The following morning, one of the girls struggled to open her door. Managing to crack it slightly, she was met by a wall of snow. Confused, she questioned why the forecast had given no warning. Inside, people wrapped themselves in blankets, trying to stay warm. The girl checked the closet and realized they had very few clothes suited for winter. Doubt crept in about how long the cold would last. Elsewhere, Jong lay asleep in his bed. A sudden ringing disturbed his rest. He opened his eyes and saw Yu Qing's name flashing on the screen. She appeared to be lying in bed as well. With a tired voice, Jong questioned the reason for the early call. She smiled through the video and mentioned the weather, asking if he had prepared for the cold by stocking up in advance. Stretching as he peered outside, Jong replied that he had briefly heard a friend mention something, although he never expected the temperature to fall so drastically. Yu Qing's voice grew louder as she accused him of hoarding supplies. Then, with a slight blush, she asked why he had not warned her, blaming her current freezing state on his silence. Jong quietly smirked and informed her that if she had nothing important to say, he would end the call. Her eyes widened as she begged him not to disconnect, though he ended the conversation anyway. Alone, Yu Qing began to bite her fingernails, muttering that he had lost his mind. At the same time, she realized she needed to come up with a plan quickly. Jong pressed a hand to his face and acknowledged that he had misjudged the situation. He had not expected Yu Qing to turn against him so quickly. Raising both arms, he told himself it was time for a shower, breakfast, and a check on the morning news. While eating at the table, he listened to the broadcast. The reporter announced that strong icy winds had struck the planet overnight, causing abrupt global temperature shifts. Meteorologists were still investigating the origin of the cold front. Jong paused, fork in hand, and remarked internally that this cold mirrored the one he had experienced in his previous life. His phone buzzed beside his plate. Messages from Yu Qing lit up the screen, requesting him to share some of his supplies. Stretching out on the sofa, Jong wondered if she truly feared stepping outside into the freezing air. It seemed easier for her to ask him instead. He snapped a photo of his lavish breakfast and grinned. In his thoughts, he promised she would receive nothing in this life. Her mockery and betrayal in the past would be repaid in full now. Yu Qing replied quickly, joking that she knew he couldn't possibly be starving. He sent her another photo and told her that he had nearly finished everything. Shocked, she asked if he had really eaten premium steak and washed it down with French wine. Staring at her phone, she found it odd that someone as wealthy as him lived in a standard high-rise apartment. With a playful smile, she hinted that she would not mind having steak and wine too. Jong simply told her to visit the supermarket and buy it herself. Irritated, she nearly sent him an angry reply, but stopped herself. Her brows lowered, and she swore not to let him win this exchange. Jong tossed his phone aside. A notification popped up on his tablet for remote access to the building's surveillance system. Smiling again, he picked up the tablet and noticed Auntie Lin standing at the front entrance. He predicted that things were about to get interesting. Auntie Lin faced the gathering crowd and urged everyone to remain calm. She claimed the snowfall would likely stop in 2 or 3 days, so there was no reason to panic or rush for supplies. The residents, however, voiced their doubts. Many believed the situation could worsen, and stocking up now might prevent bigger problems later, especially with prices expected to rise. In response, Auntie Lin spread her arms and warned that hoarding would only fuel panic. Scarcity would follow, and soon people would be unable to afford necessities. Her voice rose as she declared that anyone caught stockpiling food would be reported immediately. Just then, all heads turned as Jong stepped forward and addressed the old woman. With a polite smile, he asked whether she truly believed this freeze would pass so quickly. Then he calmly questioned who would take responsibility if it lasted longer and people began starving in their homes. The residents turned their attention to Auntie Lin, acknowledging that Jong had raised a valid point. Auntie Lin responded with a confident smile, assuring them there would be no supply shortages since the snowstorm would pass soon. Internally, she questioned whether Jong felt no shame speaking that way in front of everyone. She pointed a finger at him, accusing him of violating community rules. Jong waved her off dismissively and muttered a few choice insults under his breath. He turned away, declaring that with the cold reaching such extremes, he would not step outside even if begged. Entering the elevator, he left without hesitation. Auntie Lin stood silently, her expression darkening as she decided that he needed to be taught a lesson. Several days passed. Jong lounged on his sofa with a bag of potato chips beside him. He munched on them while playing a game on his console, reflecting on how human relationships were often needlessly complicated. His phone buzzed unexpectedly, making him wonder who would be contacting him at such a time. He glanced at the screen and saw a group message from Auntie Lin, instructing him to come downstairs and help clear the snow. Jong smirked and remarked that the snow had already buried the first floor completely, and in another month, it would likely reach the third. He typed back that he would help with snow removal once the snowfall finally stopped. Auntie Lin, sitting beside her grandson and warming herself near the heater, read his response with a frown. She complained that if it weren't for Jong, the others would not have resisted her authority. His influence had shifted the group's loyalty. She tapped quickly on her phone, sending another message to the group chat. This time, she criticized the idea that a young and healthy man like Jong refused to support his neighbors. Meanwhile, Jong sipped his soda and noted how she abused her position on the district committee. He observed that the other tenants were waiting for him to lash out so they could withdraw quietly and avoid confrontation, behaving like ostriches burying their heads. He smiled again, clearly enjoying the situation. He typed a message challenging her logic. If this was for the collective good, then responsibility should be shared fairly. He pointed out that she had selectively listed only a few names for the snow clearing task, excluding wealthier tenants entirely. Sweat began to form on Auntie Lin's brow as she read his message. The other tenants started agreeing with Jong, questioning why the middle class had been singled out for the physical work. Jong recalled two specific residents: Chen Jong from the 6th floor, who commanded over 100 subordinates, and Xu Hao from the 2nd floor, a fourth-generation heir with powerful family connections. Jong casually bit into another chip and typed their names into the chat, asking why Auntie Lin had not asked either of them to contribute. Jong remembered both Chen Jong and Xu Hao clearly. In his previous life, Chen Jong had been the one who broke down his door with an axe, while Xu Hao had stabbed him first. Now, sitting calmly, Jong poured himself a glass of wine and muttered that although both men were trash, he still needed to deal with them. Auntie Lin, watching the situation unfold in the group chat, frowned in frustration. She believed Jong had brought up the names of those two men only to avoid going outside himself. Her expression grew fierce as she reminded herself that giving in would cause the others to stop taking her seriously. Meanwhile, Chen Jong was lounging on his sofa, clearly uninterested in any form of participation. When he read Auntie Lin's message asking for help from all residents, including him, his jaw dropped in disbelief. He openly questioned whether she was mentally stable, claiming the snowstorm outside was practically a frozen nightmare and that she should be in a hospital instead. Xu Hao added his own message, recording a voice note stating that snow shoveling was not part of his responsibilities. Since he had no work obligations, he preferred to stay in bed. Lying next to a girl, he insulted Auntie Lin, accusing her of behaving like royalty just because the tenants paid her a modest salary. His tone was dismissive, showing no concern for the less privileged residents. He even recorded a video message telling anyone who wanted to shovel snow to do it quickly before heading to their actual jobs to earn a living. Auntie Lin's face twisted with fury as she watched the responses. Her voice rose in anger, blaming everything on Jong. She insisted that it was his interference that led to her conflict with the wealthier residents. At that moment, Jong was in the kitchen preparing a meal. Holding a bowl of hot food, he overheard her shouting through the walls, accusing him of making her life unbearable. He walked back to the sofa, sat down, and quietly questioned whether her existence served any other purpose than to be scolded. His expression turned cold as he reminded himself that he would not be intimidated, warning her in his thoughts to stop talking if she valued her safety. Auntie Lin, now shaken, sat up and muttered that Jong was insane, though she swore not to back down. Suddenly, a loud knock echoed through Jong's apartment. Chen Jong stood at the door, yelling that they needed to talk about the comments Jong had made in the group chat. Jong remained still, then walked toward the door. Without a word, he picked up a crossbow and opened a small viewing window. Chen Jong continued to shout, threatening to break the door down. As his foot slammed against the door, Jong calmly took aim with the crossbow, unshaken. Jong smirked, deciding that killing Chen Jong would be pointless. Instead, he raised the crossbow and aimed for the leg. Ending it quickly would have been dull. Outside, Chen Jong gripped a bat and shouted for Jong to come out so they could settle things face to face. An arrow shot out at full speed and struck Chen Jong's leg. He collapsed instantly, writhing in pain. Through the peephole, Jong watched him roll side to side, then slung the crossbow over his shoulder. With the freezing temperature and a fresh wound, Jong noted that Chen Jong wouldn't be enjoying himself anytime soon. Eventually, Chen Jong forced himself up and limped away. Without proper medical attention or enough medicine, infection was inevitable. He gritted his teeth as the cold and pain overtook him. Death would not be swift, only miserable. Upon reaching the elevator, Chen Jong leaned heavily against the railing. He muttered that Jong really meant to kill him. Staring at the elevator panel, he fumbled for his phone, realizing he needed help fast. Without first aid, his leg would become useless in less than 30 minutes. He hobbled toward a nearby apartment and began searching inside a drawer, desperate to find something to save himself. Scissors were his first choice. He attempted to cut the shaft of the arrow, but even if successful, the arrowhead would still be embedded. In desperation, he gave the arrow a firm tug. Blood gushed out as the metal point tore free. The arrow hit the floor, leaving his leg mangled. Seething with rage, Chen Jong picked up his phone and declared that he had no choice but to kill Jong. In the group chat, he sent a warning, telling Jong not to die too early. Jong responded calmly, stating that if he returned, he would lose more than just his leg. Auntie Lin stared at the message thread, her jaw dropping. She had not expected Jong to fight back. Yu Qing, viewing the same messages on her phone, frowned in disbelief. Chen Jong, gritting his teeth, made another call. This time, his voice was sharp and furious. He gave a direct order to his men. His face twisted with rage as he demanded that they prepare to hunt down and kill a dog. Snow continued to fall rapidly outside, piling high without pause. Inside a nearby apartment, a man rested a machete on his shoulder and declared they were heading to Jong's place. Their goal was to avenge their boss. Chen Jong, sitting nearby with a wrapped leg, added that he had nearly lost that leg because of Jong. He reminded them that Jong lived in apartment 2401 and stressed the need for a surprise attack. Their mission was to eliminate him completely. The group arrived soon after, standing in front of Jong's metal-reinforced door. A small observation window was set into the frame. One of the attackers pulled out a cleaver and shouted for Jong to come out. He promised that Jong would die that day for injuring their leader. Striking the door hard, he ranted about the blocked roads and how difficult it had been to reach the building. Escape was no longer an option. Suddenly, the blade snapped mid-swing, leaving the man sweating. He stared at the door, shocked by its durability. The structure was clearly solid metal. He questioned how anyone could afford such a defense and how many enemies Jong must have had to require it. Inside, knocking echoed through a tablet on Jong's table. He exhaled deeply and acknowledged they would not give up easily. Looking at the screen, he mocked their lack of strength, stating they must not have eaten enough to break through. One of the attackers shouted again, calling him a coward for hiding and daring him to step outside. Jong calmly walked to the sink. He filled a hose with water and prepared to respond. Moments later, an intense stream of freezing water blasted the men outside. They howled as the icy spray struck their bodies. Within seconds, they collapsed onto the floor, shivering uncontrollably and pleading for it to stop. One man, unable to move, begged the others to wait for him. Jong considered using his crossbow, though he admitted the water proved more effective. Inside another apartment, Chen Jong, lounging on a sofa, asked about Jong's location and whether the problem had been solved. He raised his voice, demanding an explanation. Tearfully, one of the attackers described what had happened. He said the door was impossibly thick and resisted every effort they made. After hours of trying, they barely scratched it. Then Jong poured water on them, freezing them nearly to death. Chen Zhang clenched his teeth and admitted the door had indeed looked sturdy. He cracked his knuckles and declared it meaningless. Sooner or later, Jong would have to come out. When he did, they would be ready. His men agreed, vowing to slice Jong apart the moment he appeared. Meanwhile, several residents struggled to dig paths through the snow. One of them commented that they lacked enough people. Another said they had managed to clear doorways, but reaching the supermarket remained impossible. A third noted that the snowfall outpaced their shoveling, making it a losing battle without a snowplow. He suggested everyone return inside before they froze to death. Jong, watching from his balcony, noticed the group turning back. After observing for a moment, he discarded a piece of paper and reflected on the futility of resisting nature. No one could outmatch a disaster of this scale. On his television, a girl appeared and reported on the cataclysm. She stated that the government acknowledged its failure to prevent such a tragedy. So far, around 10 million people have died, and over 200 million have suffered. She urged viewers to stay calm. Jong stretched and yawned, his thoughts trailing into silence. No amount of logic could grasp the true magnitude of this destruction. The human mind, he concluded, was not equipped to comprehend such overwhelming loss. Jong lay on the couch, scrolling through messages. One from Aunt Lin expressed confidence that their country would soon recover from the disaster. She urged everyone not to worry, reminding them to support one another and avoid unnecessary stockpiling. According to her, the storm would soon pass. A new message from Yu Qing appeared, asking if Jong was all right. He smiled faintly, assuming she did not genuinely care whether he lived or died. He replied that he was fine. She followed up with a request for food, claiming she had run out and reminding him he had stocked up heavily. She promised to treat him to dinner later in return. Jong furrowed his brows at the request. He turned on his flashlight and questioned how quickly she could have finished her supplies. He recalled that they had bought mostly junk food not long ago, yet now she had none left. Yu Qing, upon seeing the photo of canned goods Jong had sent, accused him of planning for this all along and only looking after himself. Her friend chimed in, stating that even if Jong were wealthy, she hoped he would end up single. Yu Qing, biting her lip, sent another message, saying he had upset her deeply and asked if he understood the seriousness of the situation. Jong smirked, dismissing the emotional shift. He believed they needed to learn to manage on their own. Her mood always seemed to fluctuate, and he had no intention of being manipulated by it. Yu Qing's friend reacted dramatically, asking how long the blizzard would last and questioning his lack of empathy for sending food pictures while they starved. Jong, sipping soda, read a message implying that his unwillingness to help meant he did not care about Yu Qing. His response mentioned nothing serious, only that the green tea with lotus tasted great. A flat reply followed in the chat. The friend, clearly annoyed, asked what he meant by that. She turned sharply and insulted Jong, reminding Yu Qing that she had only asked for food and was completely ignored. Yu Qing responded coldly, questioning their connection to Jong and asking not to hear about him again. Her friend, hands in her pockets, asked whether Yu Qing had any other options and mentioned that they needed to find someone who could actually assist. Suddenly, Yu Qing's eyes lit up. She mentioned asking Zhou Peng for help. Moments later, Zhou Peng arrived holding a bag. He proudly said he had chosen the best and most expensive items among the discounted goods. Yu Qing closed the door behind him slowly. Lowering her eyebrows, she questioned whether Zhou Peng really cared for her and realized she would have to find out for sure. 3 days later, the windows of a tall building lit up at night. Jong, chewing on a piece of chicken, commented that the most interesting part was about to begin. The lights suddenly went out across the building, leaving residents confused and uncertain about what to do next. Residents began emerging from their apartments, gathering in the hallway to confirm the power outage. A woman holding a child mentioned they had lost water as well, unable to even prepare baby formula. While she tried to soothe the crying child, a man cleaned his glasses and asked what they should do next, noting that the temperature was dropping rapidly. Without heaters, survival would soon become impossible. Everyone looked around in confusion, wondering why no representative from the management company had arrived. The fear of the indoor temperature falling below -30 was growing, especially since food supplies had already run out. Travel to stores was impossible due to the deep snow, and if the situation continued, death from cold or starvation seemed inevitable. Jong, chewing on a toothpick, stood silently. He had no expectations of help from the management. Instead, he walked to the yellow generator in his apartment, pulled the handle, and attempted to start it. A dim light flickered on in his window, becoming the only visible sign of warmth in the building. Wrapped tightly in a blanket, Auntie Lin sat beside her grandson, watching the dim light outside. She whispered to herself, trying to make sense of how quickly everything had changed. Just days earlier, life had been normal. Her thoughts drifted to the group chat, where residents shared panicked stories. Many recalled a similar blizzard from years ago that had wiped out entire cities. Survival now depended on individual effort, not support from authorities. Her grandson, seated on the couch, asked why it was so cold and when his parents would return. Auntie Lin forced a smile and promised they would be back soon, though her heart remained heavy with doubt. She reminded herself she had to protect him. Their survival rested on her actions. Elsewhere in the complex, Yu Qing, Kai Ning, and Xu Hao read messages in the chat. Auntie Lin had posted reassurances, claiming the current crisis was temporary. She urged everyone to work with the management company, warning that non-compliance would result in being reported to the authorities. Kai Ning looked at Yu Qing with concern, asking if the situation was really that serious and what conditions outside had become. Xu Hao dismissed the conversation entirely. He tossed his phone aside, calling Auntie Lin manipulative. Chen Jong, lounging on his couch, also read the messages and scoffed. He criticized the old woman for giving commands instead of offering real solutions. The others in his group, huddled in blankets, nervously asked what to do. They were running low on medicine and had no way to leave. Chen Jong snapped, calling them useless and telling them to stay quiet. Jong, meanwhile, had just finished a video game. He stood stretching in front of the television when his phone vibrated with a new notification. It was a message in the neighborhood group chat, again from Auntie Lin. She explained that the storm had severely impacted everyone and encouraged a communal approach. She proposed collecting supplies from every unit to redistribute them equally. Jong read her message and smirked. He remembered the same tactic being used before. 2 private messages from Auntie Lin appeared on his screen. He opened them and stared at the text, surprised by her timing. It was as if she had been watching him the entire time. In the messages, she asked if he had enough supplies. She mentioned that she knew about his job in the warehouse and had seen him haul 3 carts of goods. She insisted that everyone had to contribute in times like this. Jong narrowed his eyes. He recalled that in his previous life, he had tried to help her, only for it to lead to serious consequences. He remembered how that kindness had put a target on his back. With a cold expression, he pressed the red button on his phone and responded. He reminded her not to forget to share those collected supplies with him too. In his mind, he knew she had been one of the reasons he was betrayed and ultimately killed before. Auntie Lin stared at her phone with frustration. She muttered that Jong worked in a warehouse, had access to discounted goods, and hoarded more than he needed. Her expression softened slightly as she stroked her grandson's head, reminding herself that he needed encouragement. Giving up now would solve nothing. If she could come up with a solution, perhaps they would last another week on supplies. A sly smile crossed her face. She looked back at her phone and told the boy that everyone knew Jong managed the warehouse. He did not need food. This was an order from the organization, and he had to obey. On the other end, Jong sat with a toothpick between his teeth. He responded casually, saying he would comply, though food had been scarce lately. He asked why she had not offered him a few packets of noodles first. Auntie Lin shouted through the phone, declaring that she represented the organization's interests. If he refused to hand over materials, then he was acting against the collective. She warned him that there would be consequences. Jong, unfazed, smiled and responded that she was just a district committee employee, not someone with authority over him. Her frustration grew. She clenched her teeth as Jong told her to figure things out on her own, adding that he would be at home if she needed him. The call ended abruptly. Auntie Lin slammed her phone down, furious at her lack of influence. She called herself a leader yet could not find a way to control him. Grabbing her head, she considered sending people after him. However, she quickly realized such a move would expose her. Others might begin refusing supply requests as well. That would spiral out of control. Snow began falling under a crescent moon that hung above the tall apartment blocks. Jong watched footage from the surveillance cameras and smirked. With noodles dangling from his mouth, he reflected that supplies typically lasted 3 to 5 days. Cold weather shortened that time frame, and people had fallen for their own false promises. It was not his fault. A raging blizzard cloaked the world outside. Jong considered how survival now hinged on having enough supplies. Without them, death waited patiently at the doorstep. On his phone, the neighbor group chat flickered to life. A resident asked Auntie Lin about supply distribution, claiming her family still had not eaten. She responded that equal distribution was necessary for everyone's survival. Yet wrapped in a blanket with her grandson beside her, she scoffed at the idea. They were fools, and everything would go to her. She glanced at the boxes around her, wondering briefly if she should hand out the goods she had gathered with such effort. Her grandson, sitting on her lap, shouted that the phone was ringing. She clicked her tongue in annoyance. People always needed something. When she checked the screen and saw Chen Zhong's name, she was surprised. She could not imagine what he might want. Lifting the phone to her ear, she was greeted by accusations. Chen Zhong claimed she had carefully planned everything and now held all the supplies. She coughed lightly into her fist and replied that as a committee employee, it was her role to manage distribution. Chen Zhong cut her off and told her to send the supplies immediately. His family was running out of food. Meanwhile, her grandson munched on cookies beside her. She explained that she needed time for approvals. The process could not be rushed. This response only fueled his anger. He called her shameless for hoarding supplies while pretending to enforce regulations. Chen Zhong sat on a couch, phone in hand, surrounded by a gang wielding bats. With a grin, he declared that if she refused, he would come in person with his men and take the supplies by force. Chen Zhong forced his way through the door with a group of men behind him. Auntie Lin cried out, warning them that this was private property. Her protest ended when Chen Zhong struck her across the face, leaving a red mark. He accused her of deceiving tenants with false promises of grocery deliveries and said she was getting exactly what she deserved. Elsewhere, Jong sat comfortably, biting into a sausage while watching the scene unfold through the surveillance cameras. He smirked at the chaos, considering the incident as fitting punishment. An idea came to him, and with a satisfied grin, he decided to share the footage in the neighborhood group chat. He anticipated an entertaining reaction. Inside the apartment, the group of intruders stood wielding bats. Chen Zhong ordered them to search the home and collect all available food, claiming it as compensation for the supposed hard work of the building's residents. Auntie Lin clung to his leg, pleading with them not to take everything. Her voice trembled as she explained that the food was all she had for herself and her grandson. Chen Zhong looked down with disdain and barked at her to release him. When she persisted, he kicked her away violently. Auntie Lin fell back, tears streaming down her face. Her grandson Xiao Hu, frozen in shock, watched her fall to the ground. Fueled by rage, Xiao Hu charged with a knife in hand. He drove the blade into the backside of a man with a mohawk, making the man scream and widen his eyes in pain. The injured man turned to the boy, fists clenched and teeth gritted, threatening him in fury. In retaliation, he kicked Xiao Hu hard, sending the child screaming to the floor. One of the others laughed while looking at the boy sprawled on the couch. He praised the Mohawk man, saying all that leg training finally had a use. He added that tossing the boy like a rabbit was impressive. The Mohawk man, pleased with himself, flung the bloodied knife over his shoulder and remarked how enjoyable the moment had been, suggesting they record it. Auntie Lin crawled toward her grandson, gently touching him with trembling hands. She called his name in despair. Chen Zhong, expression hardened, spat on the floor. With his bat resting on his shoulder, he stated coldly that this was her punishment for lying. He claimed he only gave her what she deserved. Shortly after, a video from Jong surfaced in the neighborhood group chat, showing the entire incident. Many neighbors reacted with mockery, calling Auntie Lin a fraud who had finally been exposed. One user even complimented Chen Zhong's strength, assuming he must have trained for moments like this. Jong read the comments and narrowed his eyes. Clearly, the others failed to grasp the full weight of what was happening. More messages appeared, with some neighbors praising Chen Zhong and advising him to stay cautious, warning that Auntie Lin might contact the authorities. They labeled her shameless. Jong, unfazed, stretched out his arms with satisfaction. He murmured to himself that anyone could be next, yet he remained unconcerned. Just then, a new message from Auntie Lin appeared on his screen. Jong's expression shifted as he read the contents. She was pleading for hemostatic drugs and antibiotics. Her grandson had been seriously injured, and Dr. Jo K urgently needed the medicine for surgery. A girl in a white coat appeared in the video, wearing a badge that confirmed her identity. Jong observed her carefully and wondered if Jo K truly intended to operate on Xiao Hu. Jong sat quietly on the couch, scrolling through the group chat. Jo K had just asked if anyone had spare medicine. He recalled that she used to be a doctor at Tianhai Hospital and had treated many people during the early days of the crisis in his previous life. Now, she was once again trying to help those in need. Moments later, Aunt Lin posted in the chat, pleading for medicine for her grandson. Laughter erupted from several users in the group, mocking the situation and saying the boy got what he deserved. Jong closed his eyes and shook his head. He found it strange that someone who rarely spoke had chosen this moment to ask for help. Despite her efforts, he knew that even if the boy was saved, the blizzard outside showed no signs of ending. He stood by the window, noticing that the snow had nearly reached the top of the first floor. A girl behind him clutched her head in panic. The storm, which had started a week earlier, had now buried entire cities under snow. In several regions, temperatures had plunged to -100 degrees. Those who failed to evacuate remained trapped beneath the frozen landscape. In the chat, Aunt Lin shifted her pleas toward food. She was willing to pay, and soon someone set a price. Another buyer appeared, doubling the offer. Jong continued eating chicken, remarking that people were already turning disaster into business. In nearby apartments, many residents stared at their screens, smiling as they watched food prices soar. A single pack of instant noodles is now sold for 2,000. As he chewed his food, Jong commented to himself that people still acted too naively. On the top floor, Shu Hao picked up his phone, declaring that he was wealthy and willing to pay any price. If Lin wanted help, she should contact him directly. Jong glanced out the window again. City services were no longer functioning. Transportation was crippled, and utilities had collapsed. Regardless of how much they offered, money would not follow them into the next life. In the chat, someone joked about raising the price even higher for noodles. Amid the messages, a girl holding a child pleaded for food. She had no milk left and couldn't feed the baby. Jong grinned at the irony. In his past life, many like her cried for help but quickly turned cold when someone else was vulnerable. Despite that, he remembered this particular girl had once fought fiercely to protect her child. She was not as simple as she appeared. 10 days passed. Jong lifted dumbbells, maintaining his strength. A sudden ringing interrupted his routine. He answered the call and saw two familiar, hungry faces on the screen. Based on his calculations, most residents had now depleted their supplies. The two girls lay on a bed, faces gaunt and tired. Jong raised an eyebrow, wondering aloud if they called to brag about losing weight. They ignored the remark and asked how he still had food. Their eyes shifted toward the warmth behind him, noticing the active fireplace. He casually mentioned that the fireplace worked well and kept the house warm. Yu Qing, with wide eyes and a forced smile, asked if she could come visit. She placed a hand on her cheek and added that it had been a long time since they last met. She claimed to miss him. Jong understood the girl's intentions and frowned. On a day as cold as this, she should have remained indoors. Sitting on the sofa, he noted that although he did not feel the chill himself, their pale faces and trembling limbs revealed how much the temperature had dropped. The light mood vanished. Both girls froze, their expressions falling flat. Yu Qing's frustration boiled over as she shouted. They were starving, terrified, and now frozen stiff. If he had no intention of helping, mocking them served no purpose. Jong responded calmly, suggesting she should find another fool willing to act at her command. Raising his hand, he questioned whether he had lied about anything. They were not related. He owed her nothing. He glanced at his phone and pressed the power button. In response, Yu Qing hurled it aside in anger, accusing him of overstepping his bounds. Her friend, seated beside her, commented that their mistake was not realizing who he truly was sooner. Now, they would not even get access to his supplies. She pointed at a photo of Jong and compared him to a wealthy figure, declaring that he had now become even more unreachable. Yu Qing, unable to hold back, lashed out. The tension escalated quickly as the two girls began arguing and physically fighting on the bed. Meanwhile, Jong remained unaffected. He sipped wine and watched the news. The presenter announced that the city administration had released a statement confirming that electricity would now be supplied only between 1 and 2 each day. Power plants had shut down, causing critical shortages. Jong tapped on his tablet, acknowledging that the disaster had escalated beyond what the government could conceal. He began scrolling through a chat where people were discussing the situation. One desperate user even offered to buy instant noodles from him for 5,000. Jong sighed and closed his eyes. In the face of extinction, some still clung to currency that would soon lose all value. Outside, snow continued to fall. Jong stepped onto the balcony, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air. Despite everything, he believed people needed to keep moving forward. Even in fear, they had to endure and fight to survive. Elsewhere, Aunt Lin stood close to tears beside her shivering grandson. Dr. Jo K treated a wound on Chen Zhong's arm and reminded him not to forget the supplies he had promised. Yu Qing sat quietly while her friend turned away, asking whom she could rely on now that Jong had cut them off. Holding her phone, Yu Qing admitted they couldn't tell everyone about him. Yet she also knew that the two of them alone would not be enough to bring him down. Soon after, the girls approached Zhou Peng and complained about Zhong. Upon hearing that Zhong had humiliated them, Zhou Peng clenched his fist against his palm, clearly annoyed. Yu Qing clung to his arm and insisted they find a way into Zhong's apartment. Once inside, they could claim the space for themselves. After exchanging a few words, she wrapped her arms around him and led him down the corridor. Eventually, the three of them arrived outside Zhong's apartment. Zhou Peng knocked on the door while Zhong, watching through the surveillance camera, asked what they wanted. His expression changed instantly when he spotted Yu Qing and Kai Ning holding weapons. He gritted his teeth, fully aware of their intentions. They had come to kill him. Without delay, Zhong moved to collect dirty water through a hose, preparing for retaliation. While listening to Zhou Peng speak through the door about helping one another, Zhong kept his eyes fixed on the trash can filled with wastewater. He replied coldly that if things were really that desperate, he might consider offering some help. Zhou Peng grinned over his shoulder and claimed the situation was not yet hopeless, though hunger had pushed him to act. Zhong silently brought the hose to the small opening in the door. The moment was tense as the group outside leaned forward expectantly. Without warning, a stream of filthy water burst through the opening, splashing across all three. The girls recoiled in shock, trembling as they stepped back. Zhou Peng, dripping and furious, began slamming his fist against the door, shouting that he would kill Zhong. Zhong could hear the rage in his voice. Zhou Peng's frustration grew as he tried to comprehend how Zhong had anticipated everything. With a cleaver in hand, he yelled that he would break through and finish him off. Grabbing the door handle, he was struck by a jolt of electricity. Zhong, watching through the camera, saw him collapse to the floor. He muttered that Zhou Peng clearly did not value his life. Leaning back with his hands behind his head, Zhong stared at the screen. There was a chance he might never leave this apartment, yet he found a strange sense of calm in simply observing what would become of them all. Late at night, Zhong's eyes snapped open. The distant echo of gunshots disturbed the stillness, prompting him to rise from his bed. Reaching for his tablet, he questioned whether someone in the building owned a firearm. As the screen lit up, he spotted a familiar face. Chen Zhong, along with his henchman, was in the middle of looting another apartment. Zhong glanced toward a nearby basin filled with snow. A frown crept across his face as he realized Chen Zhong was wasting precious time. Snow was currently the only available source of water, and melting it indoors required effort and patience. Shaking his head, Zhong reclined again and muttered that the residents on the third floor were as good as finished. They lacked both supplies and means of protection. Meanwhile, Chen Zhong, gripping his phone, instructed his subordinate that they first needed to eliminate the weaker residents. He uploaded a photo to the chat, a selfie with a weapon and the body of someone already killed. Declaring himself the new leader of House 25, he claimed no one had expected the disaster but he would take charge now. Zhong, brushing his teeth in his apartment, acknowledged that Chen Zhong had adapted well to the harsh environment. Despite the chaos, he had survived and seized power. However, Zhong noted that the bullets were still too few compared to the number of people. Creating fear seemed to be Chen Zhong's main strategy. Soon after, a new group chat appeared on Zhong's phone. It was titled Resistance to Chen Zhong's Actions. Curious, Zhong rubbed his face while scrolling through the messages. The participants discussed how to organize a plan to fight back. One user even laughed confidently, claiming that defeating the enemy would be easy. Zhong remained unimpressed. From his seat on the couch, he concluded that these people were far too naive. Unless they were ready to face bullets head-on, their optimism meant little. His expression changed when Uncle Yu joined the chat. The older man warned that silence would only lead to more bloodshed. He suggested that seizing the enemy's supplies was their only option. Uncle Yu, seated in his own apartment, declared his readiness to lead and take initiative. Smiles appeared across the group chat as neighbors began to rally behind him. However, Uncle Yu quickly admitted that facing Chen Zhong alone would be suicide. He estimated that he needed at least a dozen people to stand a chance. Another voice in the chat expressed concern. A young woman argued that they couldn't proceed. Lin had already robbed many of them, and trust had vanished. With a clenched fist, she insisted that Lin had taken what little they had left. If Uncle Yu led the younger ones into confrontation, she asked who would protect the elderly and the children left behind. Tension among the residents escalated as arguments split them into two opposing groups. While the chaos unfolded, Jong calmly prepared his meal, expecting nothing different from the growing unrest. Once the food was ready, he served himself and took a seat on the sofa. Reflecting on the situation, he noted how people continued blaming one another instead of working together. A sudden sharp movement followed when he accidentally burned himself with the hot meal. Meanwhile, in a neighboring apartment, an ashtray sat on a cluttered table as Chen Jong held a gun in his hand. He gave strict orders to his subordinates to move quickly. One of them hesitated and suggested they take a break for food. In response, Chen Jong raised his weapon and reminded him what happened to those who ended up starving in isolation. Without hesitation, the group discarded a body onto the floor and continued with their tasks, seizing the opportunity to act while control remained within their grasp. As they exited the apartment, one of the men remarked with satisfaction that their efforts had not been wasted. Chen Jong watched them closely, realizing that without the gun in his hand, they might have already turned against him. Back in his room, Jong monitored everything through surveillance cameras. He concluded that Chen Jong's cruelty had no limits. The bodies he left behind were not just casualties, they were a reserve of flesh for emergencies. Closing his eyes briefly, Jong made a silent promise. If Chen Jong ever attempted to approach him, he would not hesitate to end him. By the next morning, a desperate message appeared in the group chat. A terrified girl had barricaded her door with a sofa and pleaded for help. She trembled as footsteps approached. On the other side, Chen Jong stood waiting. When the door was eventually forced open, she begged for mercy, but no one intervened. The attackers dragged her away. In her final moments of freedom, she glimpsed her phone screen, which showed several people in the chat expressing cold gratitude for the delay she had provided. Elsewhere, Yu Qing and her friend sat tensely on a bed. The recent attacks convinced them that their safety was temporary. They feared the same fate would soon come for them. Yu Qing bit her finger anxiously and insisted they inform trustworthy people about Zhang's resources. She proposed gaining access to his apartment. A new notification popped up on Zhang's phone. Yu Qing had messaged him, stating that danger was unavoidable. Eventually, everyone would be caught. She urged him to cooperate with others, highlighting that his apartment had both a solid door and a balcony suitable for defense. As more people joined the group chat, Zhang quickly understood that Yu Qing had already shared details about him. However, she had likely avoided mentioning that he was the one who had injured Chen Jong. Feeling no guilt, Zhang smiled to himself. He preferred solitude and had no plans of sharing his space unless he chose to. The chat grew louder with complaints. Several members insisted that survival depended on unity and that Zhang's support was essential. In a nearby apartment, 4 individuals flinched after seeing Zhang exit the group. Yu Qing scowled and began muttering in frustration. Lu Dao, one of the group members, turned to her and questioned how they planned to deal with Zhang's refusal. He reminded them that they had already attempted to kill him once. His words stunned the 2 girls nearby. Xu Hao adjusted his glasses and suggested that kindness was no longer an option. Since Zhang was alone, they only needed to prepare and act. Lu Dao smirked and calmly revealed that he had once worked for a lockpicking company. Confident in his skills, he believed he could handle any type of lock. The group moved quickly and soon arrived at Zhang's apartment door. Yu Qing watched with a sneer, thinking that the worst Zhang could do was splash them with cold water. Outside, Lu Dao crouched in front of the lock, working to break in. Inside, Zhang observed their efforts through the tablet connected to the house security system. Calmly, he browsed through options and selected the one he deemed most appropriate. Without hesitation, he activated the high-voltage current. Electric arcs burst through the doorframe and struck Lu Dao. His body trembled violently before he dropped to the ground, unconscious. Yu Qing froze as her eyes landed on his severed arm. Shock spread among the neighbors. 2 of them immediately accused Zhang of going too far. Zhang stood still, holding a crossbow. He reminded them that they were the ones who tried to force entry and intended to kill him. Raising the weapon and taking aim, Zhang stated firmly that this was his home. The decision about who would live and who would not belonged solely to him. Zhang pulled the trigger without hesitation. An arrow shot through the crack in the door, striking the shoulder of the man standing directly in front. Zhou Peng and another rushed forward, helping him retreat from the entrance. 2 more arrows swiftly followed. One pierced Xu Hao's hand while the other lodged into another man's back. Witnessing the sudden attack, the girls panicked and fled down the corridor. In another section of the building, the group staggered into an apartment. All three wounded men collapsed in pain. One of the girls stared at the embedded arrow, her face twisting in horror when she noticed the rust on its surface. One of the injured men clenched his fist and stood slowly, warning the others that without antibiotics, infection would be inevitable. His voice trembled as he tried to deny what was happening. A moment later, one of the neighbors struck Yu Qing across the face, blaming her for everything. Another girl joined in, yelling that Yu Qing had either hidden the truth or genuinely had no idea about the crossbow. She mentioned the reinforced door, claiming it was all suspicious. Yu Qing, overwhelmed, burst into tears and claimed she had no knowledge of the trap since nothing like this had occurred the last time. One of the injured men placed a hand on the neighbor's shoulder, asking her to calm down. He backed up Yu Qing's claim, confirming that her story matched his understanding. The girl who had shouted earlier stepped aside, finally realizing there was no immediate solution. Shortly after, Jo Kei arrived to assess the situation. She inspected the wounded man's shoulder, her expression turning grim. The injury was more severe than expected. Jo Kei opened her mouth in shock, then narrowed her eyes as she examined the arrow more closely. She knelt beside the injured man and searched the first aid kit, muttering that she had seen a similar arrow before during her time at the hospital. Despite her experience, this wound was too deep. Without proper equipment, full treatment would be uncertain. Covering her mouth, she began to cry quietly. In her thoughts, she concluded that Jong had acted with deliberate cruelty. The arrow, she believed, was no accident. From her medical judgment, removing it carelessly would cause further complications. Rising to her feet, Jo Kei stated she had seen similar wounds in the past, likely caused by Jong. Yu Qing clenched her fist, recalling that a month ago, she had seen him receive a large delivery of medicine. Yu Qing frowned as memories surfaced. A month earlier, Jong had begun acting differently. He started collecting supplies and clearing out his home. Nearly every day, delivery trucks arrived with boxes, filling his apartment. Jo Kei turned to her, concluding that Jong had likely anticipated the current crisis and had prepared thoroughly. According to her, he still had enough essential items stored away. The group, overwhelmed by stress and desperation, believed they simply needed to find Jong and speak with him directly. The girls gathered and quietly discussed how to obtain medicine from him. Sister Wang smiled coldly, claiming that Jong lacked any sense of kindness, so they would have to set an example. Pointing at Yu Qing, Wang insisted she should go since the idea came from her. Jo Kei approached Yu Qing, admitting Jong's earlier behavior had been unjust. However, survival now depended on collective effort. Yu Qing stepped forward in front of the group and declared that she would try. Meanwhile, Jo Kei carefully began extracting the arrows from the wounded. Yu Qing turned away, unable to watch as screams of pain echoed through the room. Tears welled in her eyes as she called Jong, asking for his help. At that moment, Jong was inside, slicing meat and preparing a meal. He questioned whether any of them could survive the worsening snowstorm. The snowfall had blocked the city entrance, cutting off all outside aid. Supplies across the city were dwindling. People had started eating dry instant noodles. Hunger was spreading quickly. Without food, survival would soon become impossible. Jong thought of Lu Dao and how easily he had perished. Yu Qing wiped her tears and admitted her mistake. She did not try to justify herself but expressed a desire to make things right. Looking at the injured around her, she pleaded once more, stating that they would not survive without immediate assistance. Suddenly, Sister Wang snatched the phone from her hand. She reminded Jong that everyone was facing death and urged him to act like a man. While tossing vegetables into a pan, Jong responded calmly, asking why she thought he had used rusty arrows. With a grin, he said he wanted to watch them suffer. Wang screamed into the phone in disbelief. Jong grinned again, saying Yu Qing could come, but she had to come alone. Overjoyed, Yu Qing grabbed the phone back, agreeing to his conditions without hesitation. Jong smiled and gave Yu Qing permission to come. Her friend stepped forward, attempting to join her, claiming she would also follow his orders. Jong grinned and asked whether more people were really necessary. Yu Qing smiled back, stating that everything depended on him and she would do as he wished. Without hesitation, she turned and ran. Her friend tried to stop her, clinging tightly, but Yu Qing struck her, expressing frustration with their situation. Wang approached and slapped her, questioning why she would still run to him after all the suffering. She reminded Yu Qing of the hatred she once expressed and accused her of betrayal. Yu Qing turned to Zhou Peng, asking in desperation what was so wrong about wanting happiness. Approaching Jay, Yu Qing asked if someone who truly loved another would not want them to be happy. The boy crouched silently as she explained that, despite everything he had done, he could never offer her what Jong could. After speaking, she turned and walked away. Her friend, overcome with anger, pushed her to the ground. Soon after, Yu Qing was locked in a separate room. She sat alone on the floor, sobbing. Zhou Ke looked back, stating that arguments could wait. Survival without medicine would become impossible soon. Suddenly, all attention shifted as Xu Hao adjusted his glasses and announced that Zhong likely had a stockpile of food and a working fireplace. Although defeating him was unrealistic, he suggested that informing others could tilt the balance. The group stood in silence before slowly realizing that sheer numbers might be enough to challenge him. Yu Qing stood and shouted, accusing them of shamelessness. Wang responded by raising her hand again, blaming Yu Qing for their situation. Zhou Peng intervened, shielding Yu Qing and expressing his love for her. He believed that with time and effort, she would come to love him as well. Turning away, Wang called him a useless fool. Shortly afterward, a photo of Zhong's apartment appeared in the group chat. The image showed his food stores and warm shelter. One of the girls suggested they begin planning what to do next. Meanwhile, Chen Zhong and his group watched the video, salivating at the sight of the feast. With a wide grin, Chen Zhong realized the moment for his revenge had finally arrived. As more people joined the group chat, the conversation shifted into heated accusations against Zhong. Many blamed him for their worsening situation. Holding his phone, Zhong smiled calmly. His expression darkened as he muttered that he owed nothing to anyone. Staring at his own reflection, he recalled the past when he had been in the same desperate condition. Despite his suffering, they treated him like an object, eventually casting him aside without remorse. Reclining on the couch, Zhong remarked that there was no need to reason with people who acted like animals. Elsewhere, someone standing near Wang spoke with confidence, claiming they could handle Zhong. However, he admitted Zhong was fearless. Lin frowned at the comment, stating that Zhong only thought of himself. Chen Zhong clenched his teeth in frustration, vowing to track Zhong down if he survived this ordeal. Meanwhile, Zhong poured himself a glass of wine. As voices in the chat continued to grow louder with complaints and accusations, he ignored them. He walked to the window, gazing out at the frozen cityscape. The silence outside seemed more appealing than the chaos online. A sudden idea came to him, and he snapped his fingers. Remembering the snowmobiles he had prepared, he spun in place with amusement. That would allow him to go outside freely and enjoy himself. His phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Zhou Ke. She informed him that she had run out of both food and medicine. Holding the device in his hand, Zhong quietly acknowledged her message. As a doctor, she was logical and composed. He thought back to his previous life, where she had perished after giving her last supplies to a woman named Xie Li and her child. That memory lingered as he sat on the couch, weighing whether to assist her now. Despite her intelligence and compassion, he knew that clever people could easily turn on others. Stretching his arms, he reminded himself that survival came first. He refused to die again. Smiling faintly, he concluded that although he trusted her to some extent, it would be unwise to let her in without conditions. Wrapped in a blanket, Zhou Ke received a reply from Zhong. He stated that he was open to a trade, but she would need to offer something valuable in return. Holding the phone near her lips, she read the message carefully. Zhong then requested that she give something up front. Zhou Ke tensed, feeling uneasy. She had never asked anything from someone like him before. Soon, another message arrived. Zhong offered her food and medicine in exchange for fulfilling one request. Grinning, he explained that his neighbors were plotting against him. He wanted her to observe them closely and report all activity. As she read his message, Zhou Ke frowned, unsure how to respond while Zhong waited with a knowing smile. Zhou Ke clutched the phone tightly before sending a short reply, promising to do as Zhong asked. A shadow passed over Zhong's eyes as he read the message. He felt pleased with the outcome. Meanwhile, Zhou Ke stood from her seat and walked to the window. With her back turned to the outside world, she reflected on her decision in silence. Not long after, a new message appeared in Zhong's chat. Someone demanded to know if he planned to share his supplies. Stroking his chin, Zhong muttered that greed only grew stronger with time. His smile held a mocking edge as he stated that even if his home was destroyed, he would offer them nothing. Frustration boiled over in Xu Hao, who clenched his teeth at the response. Shortly after, Chen Zhong joined the group chat. He declared that their new mission was to take down Zhong. Xu Hao shouted for everyone to set aside personal grudges for the sake of survival. Uncle Yu, visibly tense, insisted that he had something urgent to tell Jong. Jo K, still holding her phone, hesitated briefly. Then she decided to reveal everything to Jong. A moment later, her message arrived on Jong's device. At that time, he stood inside his armory, selecting a gun from the rack. Her warning came quickly. After seeing the video, the people had lost control and were preparing to come for him. Jong raised the phone to his mouth and advised Jo K not to follow the rest. Lowering the phone, he pointed the gun at the screen and muttered that it would be more entertaining if she simply watched the show unfold. At that moment, a crowd began climbing the stairs to Jong's apartment. Men held metal pipes, chanting threats and pushing forward with violent intent. The hallway outside filled with bodies and footsteps. Inside, Jong observed the chaos through his camera feed, a calm smile resting on his face. Without hesitation, he activated the power panel. One man at the front raised a hammer, demanding Jong open the door. Instantly, a surge of electricity shot through his body, knocking him backward. The current spread quickly, stunning those closest to him. Bodies dropped to the floor, twitching. The rest of the crowd recoiled in fear. Soon after, Chen Jong appeared, armed with a gun. Approaching one of the frightened men, he raised the weapon and asked where he thought he was going. Xu Hao stepped forward, his fist clenched, and accused Jong of murdering his neighbors. He insisted they deserved revenge. Another man in the crowd urged them not to hesitate, encouraging the use of wooden tools to force the door open. According to him, once they broke through, they would all enjoy warmth and food. The crowd's expressions darkened. Weeks of cold and hunger had worn them down. Now, their survival hinged on getting through the barricade. A thick log slammed against the reinforced door. 4 men pushed in unison, shouting that one final effort might be enough to break through and end Jong's life. Inside the apartment, Jong winced from the sound. He poured himself a drink and muttered in frustration, wondering aloud why they were being so noisy. Reaching for the remote, he turned on the music to drown out their efforts. Outside, the raiders yelled threats, promising death as soon as the door gave way. Moments later, their energy waned. Exhausted, they collapsed to the ground, breathing heavily and admitting defeat. One of them inspected the door and questioned its durability. Another man examined it through a magnifying glass, comparing it to vault doors he had encountered during his time working at a bank. A robber sitting nearby asked if it was truly impossible to breach. The former bank employee confirmed it. He explained that even explosives would be ineffective, much less wooden tools. A younger raider stepped toward the door, still determined. While the explanation continued, Jong aimed his crossbow silently from inside. Suddenly, a bolt flew through the gap. It struck the employee in the neck. He clutched the wound as blood poured out, collapsing while chaos erupted. Someone shouted a warning, realizing Jong was armed. Panic spread quickly. The mob scrambled to retreat, pushing and shoving in desperation to flee the entrance. Across from the door, one raider stayed back, shouting curses at Jong while others lay motionless nearby. Inside, Jong calmly reloaded his crossbow. The hallway echoed with screams, accusing him of being a monster who should have perished long ago. Leaning against the wall, Xu Hao reassured the group. He told them not to panic. He claimed he had a new plan. Xu Hao slammed his fist against the wall and explained that the door was constructed from a special alloy, making it nearly impossible to break. A raider beside him, grinning, admitted he should have realized it earlier. Another man suggested that with enough people, they might be able to bring the wall down instead. Encouraged, the group redirected their effort. Sledgehammers began to strike the walls repeatedly. Xu Hao, clenching his fists, declared that Jong would not mock them much longer. As the blows continued, pieces of the outer layer began to crack. One man swung again and shouted in frustration, realizing even the wall was unnaturally strong. A younger raider ran his hand across the surface, stunned by the cold, metallic texture beneath the plaster. He dropped his shovel and muttered that none of it made sense. No one would think to build a residence like this. Another raider agreed, unable to believe that Jong's entire apartment could be fortified with steel. Some began attempting to undermine the wall's base, hitting it with shovels and pickaxes. One of them, oddly holding a glass in his hand, looked around in disbelief. Inside, Jong addressed them calmly. He asked if they truly wanted answers and revealed that the external walls of his apartment were reinforced with 20 centimeters of high-density steel, strong enough to withstand a cannonball. Their tools, he said, were completely ineffective. He tapped a button on his tablet and noted that they were only wasting energy. One of the robbers shielded his face, demanding to know why Jong had fortified his home like a bunker. Another recalled that Jong had started renovations earlier, but no one had imagined anything like this. Xu Hao pointed at him, shouting that Jong had known about the snowstorm in advance and had planned it all to survive on his own. The group fell silent. Accusations followed quickly. They claimed Jong only thought about himself, never caring if the rest of them lived or died. A man collapsed to the floor in tears, screaming that one day Jong would pay for leaving them to suffer. Chen Jong stepped forward with a gun in hand, urging patience. He suggested that while the walls and doors were reinforced, the ceilings and floors might not be. He split the group, ordering half to attack from above and the rest to strike from below. Soon, sledgehammers crashed against the ceiling and the floor from both sides. Inside, Jong watched in silence. He acknowledged that Chen Jong was clever. However, he reminded himself that he had taken every detail into account. The ceiling was steel as well. One raider shouted in disbelief, insisting that no one would go to such extremes. 3 intruders gathered in a room, whispering in shock that everything, walls, floors, ceilings, was metal. His apartment had become a steel prison. One of them crouched, gripping his stomach. Hunger gnawed at him. His breathing slowed as he realized the truth. They had nothing left. His eyes widened at the meat stored inside, the thought consuming him. They exchanged glances, uncertainty rising among them. One of the raiders, holding his phone, noticed it had become hot from prolonged use. Xu Hao, gripping his head in frustration, struggled to accept that they had no better options left. Tears streamed down his face as he shouted about Zhong's comfortable solitude, claiming anyone would envy such a life during times like this. A resident of the house stepped forward with a suggestion. During renovations, he had seen that Jong replaced the balcony with floor-to-ceiling windows. This possibility, he believed, was worth exploring. Another raider, raising his arms, insisted that if there was a window, then there had to be an entry point. It was unlikely Jong had managed to seal everything off completely. Following this lead, the group moved toward the balcony. Jong stood calmly inside, holding a steaming mug of tea. Outside the window, a crowd of intruders had gathered. One of them raised a sledgehammer, ready to strike. He announced that once the window was shattered, Jong would be finished. Another quietly admitted that if any funeral was to be held, it would more likely be for their group. Jong placed his cup on the table and disappeared from view while the raiders outside continued their discussion. They talked about how Jong's time was running out, predicting that his death was near. They imagined all his food supplies soon becoming theirs. As they spoke, Jong returned, now holding a lit Molotov cocktail. A smirk formed on his face as he prepared his next move. Without hesitation, he tossed the Molotov through a narrow gap near the balcony. He muttered that this was for the frozen crowd outside who owed him a thank you. The attackers looked up in confusion, spotting the bottle arcing down from above. It struck with a sharp burst of flame. One man caught fire instantly, his body blackening as the flames consumed him. Screams erupted, voices crying out that Jong had thrown an incendiary device. The burning figure toppled from the balcony, colliding with another explosive shell, spreading fire further. Jong, watching from behind, acknowledged that burning alive was one of the worst ways to die. A man with wide eyes pleaded for help, arms reaching out in desperation. Jong remained still, showing no intent to assist. Panicked voices rang out from those trying to flee the flames. They begged the others to help them escape, unwilling to die there. Xu Hao stepped forward with his sledgehammer, yelling at the group to retreat. He swung the weapon, hitting one of his own to keep the others from advancing. According to him, no one could be saved, and the fire threatened to spread further. The burning attackers eventually lost balance and fell from the boardwalk. Their bodies lay motionless, engulfed in flames. Strangely, some survivors nearby extended their hands toward the remains, murmuring that the warmth was comforting, even if it came from death. One of the men managed to climb over the balcony. His foot pressed down on the frozen hand of a lifeless body beneath him. Nearby, another man knelt, weak from hunger, quietly begging for even a piece of bread. 3 others stood in front of the window, appealing to Jong. They claimed he had plenty of supplies and promised loyalty in exchange for just a little food. Inside, Jong held a bowl of steaming noodles. He watched them with visible irritation and remarked that their behavior had grown exhausting. Observing their desperate expressions, he added that their pitiful display was almost enough to stir his appetite. The sight of food triggered saliva to drip from their mouths. Placing the bowl gently on the table, Jong offered them a final chance. He announced a condition: anyone who brought him Chen Zhong's head would receive food for a week. A sly grin spread across his face as he issued the challenge. The statement caused every attacker to turn sharply toward Chen Jong. Chen Jong, confused by the sudden shift in attention, tensed. He pointed his gun and ordered the others to stay back, unsure of their intentions. Glancing at his phone, he read the message Jong had sent. Realization struck: Jong had openly chosen to oppose him. A man wearing glasses stepped forward, alarmed. He asked what would happen to Jong's supplies once he left the safety of his home. In response, Chen Jong ordered his group to hold off on attacking if they had no plan. He suggested they think carefully before taking another step. Two men stood quietly at the corner of a long corridor. One questioned whether they truly intended to turn against their leader. He wondered how many more Jong could eliminate. The second man disagreed. He insisted that continuing without change would lead to starvation. According to him, their leader could not endure much longer either. Their best option was to strike a deal with Jong, trading loyalty for survival. Suddenly, a gun barrel emerged from one of the dark apartments. Chen Jong's voice echoed as he commanded his subordinates to act fast and clear out the ice. Stepping into the corridor, he urged everyone to move immediately. From another corner, a man armed with a knife crept forward. He sensed that now presented the best opportunity to act. One of Chen Jong's assistants turned around, his eyes wide in panic. Two residents had already leapt forward with weapons drawn. Behind the chaos, distant shouts alerted the leader to the threat closing in from behind. Snow blanketed the rooftop of the distant house where Chen Jong stood with a gun in hand, his recent attackers lying lifeless around him. With a hardened expression, he ordered the bodies to be taken away. One of his goons gasped as he noticed blood dripping from Chen Jong's side. Turning sharply, he winced in pain, realizing he had also been wounded. Chen Jong, still clutching his phone, contacted Dr. Zhou Ke and requested immediate medical help. A short while later, Zhou Ke arrived and wrapped up his injury. Chen Jong, now calmer, promised her something in return. Her eyes widened in disgust as she refused the offer, declaring she would rather die. In response, Chen Jong coldly reminded her that refusing meant death. He reached out to wipe her tears, assuring her that if sacrifices had to be made, she would be the last. She pulled away from his hand without speaking. Another assistant nearby, watching the scene unfold, questioned what was happening. The bandit, while loading his weapon, declared that the woman would remain until he fully recovered. Around a table, the group sat discussing their failed attempts to break into Jong's home. During the conversation, Zhou Ke overheard their plan to occupy the apartment next to Jong's and wait for him to emerge. Quietly, she rose from her seat. Chen Jong noticed her movements and asked where she was heading. Without turning, she replied that she needed the toilet. Holding her phone tightly, she used the opportunity to inform Jong of the gang's plan. Moments later, a young couple opened the door to their apartment and, under pressure, allowed the gang inside. The intruders looked them directly in the eyes. The couple placed their hands over their hearts, relieved to have been spared. That relief was short-lived. The gang struck from behind, knocking them down. Once on the floor, the couple was finished off without hesitation. Chen Jong turned to Zhou Ke, who stood beside him silently. He asked if she believed those two would be let off so easily. Tilting his head slightly, he explained that they needed a steady supply of food, which meant no one could be trusted. Xu Hao sat on the couch inside Wang's house, scratching at his shoulder with growing concern. Discoloration had begun to spread across his skin. Covered in sweat, he stared at the marks in disbelief. Tears welled in his eyes as he broke down, convinced he would not survive. Around him, others examined their wounds in silence. One of them, burying his face in his hands, muttered that they were all doomed. Zhou Peng turned to Wang, urging him to speak with Jong. Without help, they would all be dead soon. Several days later, Jong reviewed a surveillance recording. On the screen, Chen Jong appeared with a gun aimed at a group of residents. He barked out commands, forcing them into submission. Staring ahead, Chen Jong realized he was running low on ammunition and supplies. Taking out Jong quickly had become a necessity. Jong observed the footage with narrowed eyes. From the gestures, it was clear the bandit used fear to control the others. A call came through on his phone. After answering, he heard a faint voice on the line. Wrapped in a blanket, Zhou Ke whispered that the gang had begun raiding homes and murdering innocent residents. With a hand covering her mouth, she explained that people had been disappearing for days. Her voice trembled as she added that she had not eaten in 2 days. Lowering her voice, she asked Jong for help. Jong, hearing the desperation in her tone, frowned. A doctor could be valuable during such times, which meant letting her die was not an option. Clenching his fist, he saw a rare opportunity. Jo-K listened, surprised, as Jong offered to help, on one condition. She would need to complete a task for him. Outside, Jo-Pung stood in front of Jong's door. He shouted an apology, claiming that constant hiding was pointless. Looking pale, he explained that the infection was worsening and nothing could stop it. The man was sweating profusely, though the air was already freezing. Jong, speaking calmly, stated that no treatment could reverse such a wound. He then suggested Jo-Pung take a step he had never dared before. Jo-Pung bowed his head in silence. At that moment, he knew Jong was right. Jo-Pung walked through the corridor, convinced he had nothing left to fear. Reaching a door, he opened it and called out to Yu Qing. She stood with her arms folded, questioning what he wanted. Taking her hand, he asked her to marry him. She rejected the proposal immediately and pushed him away, stating that she needed to find Jong and could not afford distractions. Enraged, Jo-Pung grabbed her by the neck, shouting that they would both descend into ruin together. In response, Yu Qing struck him across the cheek and told him to stay away, disgusted by his presence. Mouth agape, Jo-Pung screamed that she was responsible for what had become of him. Meanwhile, Jo-K held a jar of sleeping pills and reflected on the promise she had made to help Jong. Facing Chen Jong, she stated she would assist with the cooking. Chen Jong, hands on his hips, appeared taken aback by her willingness. She turned away and explained that survival was her only goal. Chen Jong accepted her offer by raising a hand in agreement. Inside the kitchen, Jo-K began chopping wood. The cook instructed her to keep the fire steady. She frowned slightly, relieved that the gang saw her only as a helper. Seizing the moment, she emptied the bottle of pills into the pot. Covering her mouth, she stirred the mixture carefully. Before long, the bandits sat around with plates in their hands. The leader examined his spoon and commented that he never imagined Jo-K would become part of their group. Jo-K, maintaining her composure, told them she preferred to eat elsewhere. Closing the door behind her, she considered the amount of sedative used. She estimated that the gang would remain unconscious for at least 30 minutes. Furrowing her brow, she prayed that no one had suspected her plan. The men, already growing drowsy, mentioned how exhausted they felt. Hidden around the corner, Jo-K watched with quiet satisfaction as their eyes closed one by one. Her strategy had worked. She picked up her phone and sent a message, confirming to Jong that the task had been completed. In response, he instructed her to drag the unconscious bodies to the balcony. Jo-K dragged the unconscious men onto the balcony one by one. Jong clenched his fist, satisfied that the entire gang had been gathered in one place. Jo-K, gripping her shoulders, asked whether he planned to kill them while they slept. The response she received was unexpected. Jong calmly stated that she would be the one to do it. She glanced at the rope, then heard the command to tie them securely and retrieve the gun from Chen Jong. With a brief protest, she remarked that Jong was being overly cautious. He lifted the gun and reminded her that safety always came first. Following his instructions, Jo-K tied the bandits to the railing. She reached for the firearm and heard Jong instruct her to remove the magazine before leaving. Holding the weapon, she questioned why she should place her trust in him. He frowned and reminded her that she had no better option. Without arguing further, she unloaded the gun and tossed it toward him. He caught it midair, recognizing it as the same gun Chen Jong had used earlier. Meanwhile, Jo-Pung watched Jong silently and failed to comprehend his actions. Water began pouring from a hose as Jong aimed it directly at the bound captives. Jo-K stared in disbelief, thinking the boy had completely lost his mind. Chen Jong awoke with a start, mouth wide open in panic. His confused men struggled to understand what was happening. Realization struck Chen Jong as he remembered eating the drugged meal. Turning his head, he shouted Jong's name in fury. Jong remained calm, hose in hand, and commanded his enemies to die quickly. With a twist of the valve, the stream of water intensified. Jong smiled, confident they would not survive the freezing blast, and saw no reason to waste more water. Ice began forming across Chen Jong's face as the cold overtook them. Jong raised his phone to his ear and informed Jo-K that she could return. Hearing his voice, she collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed by the moment, and whispered that she was on her way. Jong stood by the door with a gun in hand when he heard Jo-K's voice. Observing her empty hands, he concluded she posed no immediate threat and decided to let her in. As she stepped inside, a wave of warmth met her. She dropped to her knees, overwhelmed by the comfort she had not felt in a long time. Jong moved behind her and asked if she had forgotten anything. With a faint smile, he reminded her that proving she was harmless was necessary. Blushing, Jo-K asked what she needed to do. Jong clarified that he wanted to confirm she carried no hidden weapon. He sat behind her and stated that they should be honest from that moment onward. As she undressed, she heard quiet praise from her host. Jong handed her a towel and guided her to a door, suggesting she take a hot bath. He added that he had found fresh clothes for her. Water began to run in the bathroom while Jong pulled out a pack of syringes. Bringing one to his face, he considered using it. When Jo-K emerged holding the hem of her new dress, she expressed gratitude for the clothes. Jong motioned toward the sofa, inviting her to sit. Holding a hairdryer, he explained that allowing her to stay came with conditions. Looking down, Jo-K listened as he made the rules clear. Jong pointed toward the door and explained that surveillance cameras had been installed throughout the apartment and the doors were reinforced with steel. If she found the conditions unacceptable, she was free to leave immediately. Jo-K blushed and assured him that she would obey. Jong smiled, affirming that she had made a wise choice under the circumstances. As he gently ran his hand through her hair, he leaned in and said that it was time he told her a secret. Jong ran his fingers through Jo-K's hair and stated that secrecy was the foundation of their cooperation. Stretching his arms outward, he explained that he had eliminated those who had threatened his life. Jo-K, with her head lowered, acknowledged that she had witnessed it herself. Jong sat beside her on the sofa and mentioned that she had likely heard about the incident on the news. He described the explosion in space and the resulting surge of energy, which triggered a snowstorm. Based on his understanding, the energy rays had the potential to not only alter the weather but also restructure the human body and grant it new capabilities. A bag of food materialized in his hand. He announced that he had acquired the ability of inventory space. He then tossed the bag onto her body and clarified that everything visible in the apartment represented only a fraction of what he owned. The bulk of his supplies were hidden in storage, accessible only while he remained alive. If he survived, she would benefit from all of it. Jo-K stared at the food at her feet, silently accepting the reality of his powers. Jong confirmed that it was for her. She immediately reached for the food with hunger, and he handed her a glass of water. Watching her, he remarked that she had yet to earn his full trust. He added that he had no intention of handling all the domestic chores on his own. Once she finished drinking, Jong explained that the sewer system had frozen long ago, making all bathroom responsibilities hers now. He suddenly brought a finger to her lips and questioned how far she was willing to go to keep these benefits. Following a brief silence, Jo-K's expression shifted. Jong observed her as she began to undress, referring to him as her master. Their lips met in a deep kiss. Jong removed his clothes and pulled her toward him. Her face flushed, and she gazed up at him. Their hands locked, fingers intertwined. By the next morning, Jong passed by his room and noticed Jo-K still asleep. He reflected that perhaps he had gone too far the night before. He knocked on the door and called out, asking if she wanted to get out of bed and eat something. Jo-K stirred, rolled over, and stood up. She picked up her bra from the floor and agreed. Later, they shared burgers and soda. Once she had eaten, Jong asked if she felt full. She admitted she was not, suggesting she had expected to eat even more. However, she noted that such quantities might lead to gastroenteritis. Moments later, Jong tossed her a jacket. After she put it on and asked about their next move, he walked to the balcony. With a bat in his hands and a sinister smile on his face, he declared that he planned to smash some chunks of ice. Jong handed another bat to Jo-K and she asked why he was doing this since the targets were already dead. His eyes filled with contempt as he explained that even in death, they remained an eyesore. He wanted them gone. He then ordered her to destroy the frozen corpses as a message to others that defiance would not be tolerated. Jo-K stepped onto the open balcony. Jong raised a hand toward the lifeless bodies and instructed her to begin, stating it was for the sake of their lasting partnership. Without delay, Jo-K approached the frozen bandits and brought the bat down with full force. Jong stood nearby, recording everything on his phone. As she struck again, she noticed the camera and asked if he was truly filming it. Jong kept his phone steady, confirming that the footage would serve as a warning to anyone thinking of challenging him. Encouraged by his response, Jo-K delivered another powerful swing against the icy corpse. Soon after, the video was uploaded to the building's group chat. Viewers, many of whom had suffered under the hands of Chen Jong and his gang, began to express overwhelming relief. Some wept with joy, while others cheered at the fall of their tormentors. Messages poured in, praising the mysterious figure who had brought justice. Suddenly, Jong posted a message declaring that the building was now under his rule. Seated on the couch beside Joe, Jong read through the chat. Dozens asked if he was truly the one who had killed Chen Jong and his men. Others wanted to know if he had access to food. As he scrolled, his phone rang. Seeing the caller ID, he widened his eyes. It was Yu Qing. He answered the call, hearing her familiar voice. She asked if he was now living with that doctor. From a nearby apartment, Yu Qing confessed that with Chen Jong gone, she hoped to be with him again. She reminded him of his past promises, insisting that he once said she deserved a happy life. According to her, he could not possibly choose someone else. He belonged to her entirely. Jong listened in silence, surprised she had survived. Yu Qing placed a hand over her heart and cried, questioning whether he had truly abandoned her or simply assumed she was dead. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she declared her love, insisting that she wanted nothing more than to be with him again. She pleaded with him to send Joe away so they could live together as before. While she spoke, two angry women appeared behind her. Within moments, loud shouting and the sound of a struggle erupted through the phone. Jong lowered the device and set it aside. Joe leaned into him with a soft blush, whispering that she was not like the others. Jong, now slightly red from embarrassment, turned to look at her. As he stared, a wicked grin slowly spread across his face. He realized that if Yu Qing had seen them together just now, she would have lost control completely. As the struggle between the girls continued, Jong's voice suddenly came through Yu Qing's phone. He calmly stated that she was a good person, though she had arrived too late. He had already found someone better. Yu Qing immediately grabbed the phone, demanding to know if he was truly happy with someone else. The screen displayed a photo of Jong and Joe together. Seeing the image, Yu Qing's expression twisted in rage. She screamed that he could not do this to her, declaring her love to be deeper and more genuine. According to her, Joe was only using him. She pleaded for one chance to prove that her feelings were real. Her voice broke as she begged, but Jong remained composed. She froze upon hearing his calm response. He explained that it was no longer worth holding on, as his relationship with Joe had become sincere. He asked her to let go and suggested that they end contact to avoid misunderstandings. Tears poured down Yu Qing's face as she cried out in disbelief. She reminded him of the years he had pursued her and questioned what had changed. Falling to the floor, she blamed herself and muttered that she should not exist. The two women beside her laughed mockingly. Jong ended the call and muttered to himself that the entertainment had gone far enough. There was no point continuing, as her fate was already sealed. He then turned to Joe and took her hand, asking if he had been too harsh. Joe embraced his arm and replied with calm assurance, stating that she trusted his reasons. Jong smiled and extended his hand fully, expressing relief that she understood him. Later, Joe finished preparing dinner and announced that it was ready. Jong sat nearby, munching on an apple, and told her to begin without him. While she ate, he scrolled through the building's group chat. A message from Aunt Lin caught his attention. She threatened to contact her friends in the police, demanding food and stating that those who refused would face consequences. As Joe ate, she quietly asked if he suspected her of poisoning him. Jong shifted his attention and mentioned that Aunt Lin had been one of Chen Zhong's first robbery victims. It was surprising she had survived this long. Joe lowered her eyes and admitted that when she checked Lin's grandson, she had pitied them and provided a small supply of goods. Jong's gaze darkened. Noticing his expression, Joe panicked and tried to explain. She claimed it had been early on, and she had not expected the crisis to last. Her actions, she insisted, would have been different now. Jong poured juice into a glass and calmly stated that her mistake was not the core issue. Placing the glass on the table, he asked why Lin was still alive, implying that the supplies had likely run out long ago. Joe set her plate down and revealed that the grandson had passed away roughly 10 days earlier due to lack of medicine. Jong acknowledged this with quiet agreement, stating that her explanation made sense. Suddenly, wild laughter echoed from the opposite building. Both turned toward the noise. A man hurled himself off the balcony from a high floor, still laughing uncontrollably. His body plunged like a spear toward the ground. Joe exhaled deeply, asking when the chaos would finally end. Jong responded that no one knew. The weather and world had become uncontrollable, and all they could do was wait. Suddenly, Jong's phone rang. Uncle Yu was calling. Jong answered and quietly said he was listening. On the other end, Uncle Yu chuckled awkwardly and scratched his head in confusion, then asked if everything was all right. Jong smiled widely and told Uncle Yu to speak freely without unnecessary politeness. He assured him that any request would be met with his help. After ending the call, Jong looked at the phone with a knowing expression. He considered Uncle Yu one of the few honest men left, which made him potentially useful in the long run. Meanwhile, Uncle Yu sat on his bed and explained that Li Mei's daughter was running a high fever. They had no medicine, and the child was burning up. With hesitation, he asked if Jong had any medicine to spare. Jong's eyes widened slightly at the request, followed by a subtle lift of his eyebrow. Inwardly, he noted that Uncle Yu was unmarried, while Li Mei was young and attractive. Given how well the man took care of her, Jong assumed there was more beneath the surface. After a short pause, Jong extended his hand to the side and agreed to share some medicine. He told Uncle Yu to come and collect it. The older man expressed deep gratitude, acknowledging Jong had helped him twice already and promising never to refuse him anything in return. Jong closed his eyes and responded that their bond had lasted for many years, one that ran deeper than his connection with his own relatives. Lowering his head slightly, he stated that there was no need for empty words, it was time to come for the medicine. Once the call ended, Jong quietly reflected that Li Mei was not as innocent as she seemed. Uncle Yu was the only person who had followed his advice and made adequate preparations. Naturally, he was the most suitable partner for someone like her. At that moment, Jo-kei stood nearby holding a glass of juice. She questioned whether Jong and Uncle Yu were truly that close. Jong replied that in times like this, survival came first. Taking the glass from her hand, he added that Uncle Yu was a decent man. If he helped him now, he could use his loyalty later. After finishing the juice, he placed the empty glass on the table and remarked that he did not want the chaos around them to corrupt him. Honest people were becoming rare. A short while later, a knock came at the door. Jong checked the security camera and noticed that Uncle Yu had not come alone. Li Mei stood beside him. Seeing her, Jong frowned and questioned her presence. He asked again if it was truly Uncle Yu, who stepped forward and confirmed it was. Li Mei raised her voice and informed him that her child had a fever. Without opening the door, Jong tossed a small box of medicine through the opening. He told them to use it for the girl, assuring that it would be enough for now. Uncle Yu bent down and picked up the medicine with visible relief. He thanked Jong sincerely for coming to their aid once more. Suddenly, Li Mei rushed forward and began pleading. She asked if Jong could take in the child temporarily, explaining that his place had a heater while their own apartment was unbearably cold. Her fear was that the child might freeze to death before recovering. Jong remained silent, leaning against the wall with arms folded. In his thoughts, he questioned if her request had crossed a line. He suspected that if he allowed the child inside, the mother might soon follow. After a moment of thought, Jong refused her plea, stating that he could not open his home to just anyone. Besides, he was running low on fuel, and the temperature inside was barely better than outside. Uncle Yu placed a hand on Li Mei's shoulder and reminded her that Jong had already done enough by giving them medicine. He suggested they return home and find warmer clothes. Li Mei turned to him and asked if a man could truly understand a mother's worry. Her daughter was still very young. Tears welled in her eyes as she turned back to the door. With a trembling voice, she said she knew her request would likely be denied. Even so, she begged Jong to take the child, even if only for a short time. Jong stood behind the door, arms still folded, listening to every word. After a brief pause, Jong smiled and remarked that before the world fell apart, she would have been able to predict his answer. His eyes moved toward the door as he spoke about the others in the building. They were all waiting for his downfall, hoping to seize his apartment once he was gone. Even Uncle Yu had likely felt that same fear. Everyone understood the danger now. Suddenly, Uncle Yu turned Li Mei around and reminded her that Jong had done more for them than anyone else. He questioned who else would provide them with medicine under such conditions. Li Mei, in response, pointed out that Jo-kei had been allowed to live in his home. Jong replied calmly that they were in a relationship. The unexpected statement left Jo-kei frozen. A light blush appeared on her cheeks, and she looked down, silently admitting that although he had said it without meaning, it still made her feel good. Yu turned away and told Li Mei it was time to go. He stated that Jong had done enough for them. Li Mei nodded in agreement but still expressed her desire to give her daughter a better life. Yu gently placed a hand on her back and offered an apology to Jong before thanking him again. Jong responded with quiet understanding and moved away from the door. Releasing a heavy sigh, he muttered that dealing with Li Mei was exhausting. Jo Kei, seated nearby, asked if there were many people like her. Jong laid his head on her lap and admitted that she had a point. With his eyes closed, he added that ruining his relationship with Uncle Yu would not be wise. In his own apartment, Yu stared at Li Mei with a displeased look. He questioned how she could ask a stranger to take care of her child. Li Mei met his gaze and said it was for the good of her daughter. Then she asked what reason she had to live if her child didn't survive. Yu sat beside her and explained that he understood her concern. However, he reminded her that kindness required limits. Without John's earlier help, he would have perished long ago due to a lack of supplies. Though the conversation became tense, he still hoped his gratitude would be enough. Li Mei rested her head on his shoulder and confessed that she did not think he deserved such admiration. She hinted that she also viewed Jong with suspicion. This remark caused Yu to flinch and pull away sharply. He asked her what she meant by that. Li Mei quickly backtracked, saying she had not accused him of anything. She suggested instead that Jong might have only thrown the medicine as a way of avoiding responsibility. Perhaps he wanted to appear helpful without true intent. Her words caused Yu's expression to tighten, his teeth gritted in frustration. Li Mei pressed further, warning that Jong could use minor favors as leverage later on. She questioned whether a truly good person would treat dozens of people so harshly while living in a spacious apartment with only 2 others. Before she could continue, Yu's patience snapped. He shouted for her to stop. His expression darkened with anger as he demanded silence, declaring that he could still tell right from wrong. He asked if she no longer saw him as a human being. Li Mei's daughter began crying from the tension. In response, the mother turned to Yu and apologized, admitting she had spoken out of concern. She claimed her intention was to make him more cautious. Yu stood and declared that he would sleep in the living room that night, leaving the bedroom for them. As he left, Li Mei watched him walk away. Deep inside, she refused to accept defeat. She resolved to find another way to enter Jong's apartment. Glancing down at her daughter, she whispered that she would do everything necessary to ensure they never lacked anything again. The lower floors of the high-rise were buried under thick layers of snow. A shovel suddenly pierced the frozen surface. Gradually, a tunnel formed, and several figures emerged with sinister expressions. With cold determination, they moved forward without hesitation. Soon after, a man carrying a bucket noticed them. One of the group leaders pointed at him and gave a loud command. Before the man could escape, a shovel struck the side of his neck, sending him to the ground. Blood pooled beneath him as he lay motionless. The attackers stood over his body, muttering that they would deal with him later before continuing their advance. They reached the 24th floor and paused in front of a specific door. The leader raised his hand, signaling a man named Lao to act. Lao crouched at the base of the door, carrying dynamite. After setting it in place, he sprinted away, shouting for everyone to cover their ears. The explosion shook the hallway. Inside the apartment, Jong's eyes widened. The sound had come from right outside his door. He grabbed his gun without hesitation and rushed to check the surveillance feed. Scanning the cameras, he confirmed the living room and bedroom remained intact. The door had held up against the blast. Through the monitor, he saw the intruders approaching. They were armed with shovels, sticks, axes, and various construction tools. Recognizing their movements and gear, Jong concluded they must be the team from the neighboring building. Clearly, word about him had spread. Jong stood and approached the door, realizing that their arrival meant his presence had become known beyond this structure. Outside, the gang leader stared at the reinforced door in disbelief, questioning how explosives had failed. Lao scratched his head in confusion, insisting the bomb should have worked. Another man lifted a sledgehammer and suggested forcing the door open. Suddenly, a small opening appeared in the door. Jong's annoyed expression filled the gap as he addressed the intruders directly. On one hand, he activated his inventory ability. The other held a chemical mixture of white phosphorus dissolved in sulfur dioxide, a simplified but deadly explosive component. When ignited, it burned at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. Without hesitation, Jong tossed a Molotov cocktail along with the white phosphorus through the hole. The fire burst out instantly. The gang scattered in panic, but the flames spread rapidly, engulfing their path. Chaos erupted in the hallway as the intense heat forced them to retreat. The man engulfed in flames reached out to his comrades, silently begging for help. Before anyone could respond, a bullet pierced his head, ending his suffering instantly. Jong had fired the shot through a small opening in the door. As more of the intruders collapsed, the remaining foremen panicked and yelled, confused by the sudden presence of firearms. Another bullet struck a second man directly in the head, dropping him where he stood. Within moments, a dozen lifeless bodies lay scattered in front of Jong's door. Holding the pistol, he reflected that choosing not to purchase a machine gun had been wise. Using one would have burned through his ammunition too quickly. His gaze shifted to the barricaded entrance as he considered the situation. The harsh cold had already eliminated many potential threats. Only the most ruthless and desperate now remained, and he needed a new method to handle them. Jong moved swiftly down the corridor, his thoughts racing. These attackers had arrived with full preparation. They would not stop unless they eliminated every resident. He reached Jo-Kei, who trembled with fear, and reassured her. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. A moment later, she blushed and jumped to her feet, loudly claiming that she had not been afraid. She explained that she had merely hidden just in case, imagining a possible earthquake. Jong gestured around the apartment and calmly pointed out that they were on the 24th floor. If an earthquake did occur, they would be crushed regardless. He sat on the sofa, and Jo-Kei joined him, still shaken. She asked what had just happened. While adjusting her clothes, she remarked that these construction workers seemed far more dangerous than even Chen Jong. Jong lay back on the bed, unmoved by her concern. In his view, without weapons, these intruders posed no real threat. What concerned him more was how people who had once been strangers had now united, forming something like a community. He stared at the ceiling with hatred lingering in his eyes. Thankfully, he had removed the threat before it could keep him awake at night. Jo-Kei sat beside him again and asked if they should take revenge. In response, Jong pulled out his phone and confirmed it, not only for himself but for everyone living there. He quickly typed a message into the general chat, stating that a group of workers from the 26th building had broken in to rob and kill, though he had managed to stop them. He included a note that the man from the 10th floor had been killed, most likely from explosives brought by the attackers. He revealed they had gained access by digging a tunnel through the snow. He and Jo-Kei then read the flood of messages from residents. Many expressed relief and gratitude, calling him their protector. They believed their safety was guaranteed because of him. After reading through the comments, Jong raised his phone to his mouth and stated that he had used up all his weapons. Going forward, they could no longer depend solely on him. Following this, he called Uncle Yu. Smiling faintly at Jo-Kei, Jong waited until the man answered. The moment he picked up, Uncle Yu asked if Jong had been injured and whether he needed assistance. He added that he once drank with the workers but never imagined they were capable of murder. Jong placed a hand on his chin and admitted the danger. He still had no concrete plan, yet since fate had brought them together, he smirked coldly and told the man to share everything he knew about them. Once he had the details, he would decide how to deal with the situation. Uncle Yu questioned whether Jong truly intended to turn everyone against the attackers. Jong responded with a calm smile, confirming his intent. The older man then offered to post a message in the group chat to test how many residents would respond. Jong, glancing at Jo-Kei, advised against it. Doing so would only create suspicion among the residents, who might believe that Uncle Yu was working alongside him. Uncle Yu asked what should be done next. Corpses still lay outside Jong's door, but Jong remained composed. He explained there was no need to rush. Since the attackers had come once, they would likely return seeking revenge. Eventually, the neighbors would come to them for protection. Hearing this, Uncle Yu praised Jong's strategy and agreed to follow his lead. After ending the call, Jong turned to Jo-Kei and told her he needed a favor. She asked what he required. Resting his hand gently on her cheek, he explained that most of their neighbors distrusted him, which limited what he could do personally. Clenching his hand into a fist, he continued by saying that she and Uncle Yu would need to gather information for him. The sooner they uncovered the necessary details, the safer it would be for everyone. Jo-Kei, motivated by his trust, agreed to do her part. Several days later, Jo-Kei, now dressed in a maid's outfit, held a marker in her hand. She stood in front of a whiteboard and explained the information she had gathered from Uncle Yu. Their primary threat was a group of individuals from Building 26, a unified gang of construction workers. They were well armed with shovels, rebar, and even firearms. She drew the number 21 on the board and explained that Building 21 posed another significant risk. Two leaders, Wang Qian and Xiao Lu, led a group of young, aggressive men in their 20s who called themselves the Mad Wolf Gang. While pointing to the diagrams, she stressed how dangerous they were. Jong entered the room quietly and stood behind her. He stated that most of the other buildings had very few survivors left. Many residents had either committed suicide or died from exhaustion. He reassured her that there was no need to fear the rest. Placing a hand on her shoulder, he reminded her that they still needed to collect more data, especially regarding the presence of any hidden weapons. Reducing risk was their priority. Elsewhere in another apartment, 4 men stood around a corpse. Their leader spoke with a cold tone, declaring that Jong would be dealt with later. First, they planned to eliminate the others. Using the blood of the corpse, he scrawled a message on the wall, promising that their enemies would eventually beg for mercy. At that moment, Jong's phone vibrated. Messages flooded in from the Building 25 chat group. Residents warned him to surrender or face the consequences. Jong picked up the phone and observed how fast they had responded. He typed a reply, stating that the 4 attackers had been killed. If the residents were too weak to defend themselves, that was their problem. He saw no reason to surrender to people who were clearly more dangerous. The responses came quickly. Several individuals insisted that while Jong might be safe, they were not. This annoyed Jong. Gritting his teeth, he responded that they would die regardless. He questioned what difference it made and asked why they blamed him. Another message came through, accusing him of doing nothing during a robbery. The sender demanded to know how he had the audacity to ask such a question. Jong immediately recorded a voice message and sent it to the group. In it, he challenged their assumption, asking if they truly believed he lacked the courage to eliminate them himself. The message caused panic among the residents. One young man wrapped in a blanket grabbed his head in despair. He had believed that peace would return after Chen Jong was gone. However, a more brutal gang had now emerged. He wondered aloud if this meant they would all be killed. As he looked out the window, snow continued to fall heavily. He murmured to himself that if the snow did not melt soon, their chances of survival would vanish completely. At the same time, Jong made another call to Uncle Yu. With a serious tone, he told him that the moment had come for him to shine. Inside one of the cramped units, Uncle Yu clenched his fist with determination. He typed into the group chat, urging everyone not to panic. According to him, the gang threatening their complex numbered no more than 20. If the residents united, they could overcome the foreman. The response from the group was immediate and supportive. Encouraged, Yu settled on the couch and added that their supplies were nearly depleted. Several days had passed without food, leaving them drained of strength. Only Jong had enough resources to fight back, with his stockpile of weapons and food. Even if he led the charge, Yu believed Jong could carry them to safety. Jong, sitting in a separate room, read the message silently. Yu's suggestion to convince him played on his mind. Moments later, a private message popped up from Yu, asking what they should do next. Jong raised the phone to his lips and calmly replied that everything was under control. When the time came, they would all act together. Through teamwork, they would secure the building. Without delay, he created a group call in the general chat and addressed the residents. He stated his purpose clearly, saying he came to speak for the common good and would hear their conditions. Before finishing his sentence, someone abruptly cut in, demanding to know whether he intended to help or not. Rather than responding with frustration, Jong gestured with his hand and posed a counter-question. He wanted to know if they were truly ready to follow his every command. The answer came quickly, yes, so long as he did not order them to their deaths. Encouraged, Jong sat back on the sofa and asked whether they would arm themselves and confront the gang if he told them to. Silence followed. After a brief pause, Jong raised his phone again and questioned their reliance on him. He asked why he should risk his life to save theirs. Across the room, Jong nibbled at a slice of cake, barely reacting. Jong placed a cup of coffee on the table and commented that it was only a matter of time before the gang returned to kill someone else. Then, perhaps, the others would act. Before he could leave the call, Uncle Yu pleaded for him to stay. He reminded everyone that Jong was their best chance and that survival required effort from everyone. He asked the group if they were truly willing to wait until they were slaughtered. While Yu spoke, Jong fed Jong another bite of cake. Jong licked the cream off his finger and declared that from this moment on, they would all follow his orders. Laziness would not be rewarded. No one would have the right to complain later, as they had been warned. With that, he ended the call. Immediately, the chat in Building 25's group became lively. People began discussing ways to resist the gang. Jong read through their messages with a faint smile and typed his own contribution. He wrote that anyone who refused to fight deserved their fate. He added that as long as they followed his lead, he would make sure they received food. Leaning back in his seat, he rested his chin in one hand and reflected on their next move. Before they could defend the building, he needed to know if they were physically and mentally prepared. It would be essential to gather more supplies and weapons. For that, they would have to venture out. He lifted a finger as an idea formed. The ideal solution would be transport. He had one stored away in his inventory, an all-terrain snowmobile. With that, even in these extreme conditions, he could move through the city with ease. As he stared at the screen, another question came in from the group. They wanted to know if it was even possible to gather supplies in such harsh snow. Jong's reply came without hesitation. He told them that the difficulty did not matter, as he would do everything he could for their sake. Elsewhere, Uncle Yu clenched his fist again, uplifted by Jong's confidence. Jong explained further that he used to work in a warehouse, so he knew the locations of several supply depots in the city. Meanwhile, Lin buried her face in her hands. The weight of Jong's new role settled on her shoulders. Now that he had taken the lead, any failure would fall squarely on him. Jong admitted that their supplies were dwindling. If they hoped to survive, they had no other choice but to venture out. A few moments later, messages of appreciation filled the chat. Residents thanked him for stepping up. Jong read every word with satisfaction, knowing he now held the fate of the building in his hands. Jo K looked at Jong with a cheerful expression and said they were ready to join him. Jong responded coldly, stating that it made no difference since, in his eyes, they were just cannon fodder. As he walked down the hallway, he muttered that a small act of kindness had made him a god to them. Jo K asked if he truly planned to go outside. Jong, while securing a bulletproof vest, replied that he had enough supplies for 2 people. Pulling a shirt over the vest, he added that all he needed was the right moment to scout the area. Upon hearing this, the girl volunteered to join him, but Jong raised a finger to her lips to stop her. He gently tapped her cheek and questioned whether she really believed he did not trust her, considering their relationship. With a final wave, he told her that he trusted her completely and would return soon. Jo K watched him leave with a look of quiet concern. Minutes later, Jong reached the 4th floor, where dried blood stained the walls and floor. He walked to a window, opened it, and leapt out into the deep snow below. Moving through the snow proved difficult, forcing him to slow his pace. After scanning the area, he concluded there was no one nearby. Extending his hand, he summoned a snowmobile from his spatial storage. As he started the engine and sped off, a man from the upper floors secretly observed his movement. Jong navigated through the frozen streets, thinking to himself that someone would likely target him because of the snowmobile. A rush of excitement surged through him. It had been a long time since he experienced this kind of freedom. The opportunity for street racing across the snow felt exhilarating. Eventually, he reached the police station. To gain entry, he shattered a window and climbed inside. The interior was silent and lifeless. Suddenly, in one of the corners, he noticed several officers frozen in place. He approached the bodies and thought that they had likely been on night duty when the freeze began. Without proper gear, they had no chance of survival. Jong picked up a piece of cloth and remarked silently that those who had once defended the city deserved respect. His attention shifted as something unusual caught his eye, a round object partially visible beneath a wrecked structure. Curiosity sparked, he removed the cloth covering it. It seemed connected to the station's armory. Just then, he spotted a cluster of keys scattered across the floor. Jong picked up the keyring and began searching for the one that opened the armory. Reaching the heavy door, he gave it a firm push and stepped inside. Rows of display cases stood before him, filled with a variety of weapons. He approached them and selected a machine gun, noting the abundance of ammunition and different firearms stored in the room. With the weapon in hand, Jong pointed it forward, feeling a newfound calm settle over him. His aim had improved recently, likely due to the increasing pressure and constant danger. Reflecting on the earlier fight with the gang, he acknowledged that he had performed well. A confident smile appeared on his face as he considered his growing talent. Releasing a burst of mana, he told himself that the next step was to build a reliable team. However, he also reminded himself that even expendable fighters had their uses. He returned to the snowmobile and started it up. Along the way, Jong reasoned that most supermarkets near the city's residential zones were likely ransacked or barricaded. The chances of finding untouched supplies in the suburbs were higher. After some travel, he reached one such location, jumped off the snowmobile, and began clearing the snow with his hands. As soon as he uncovered the glass entrance, he confirmed he had found the right place. Jong secured a rope and lowered himself quickly into the building. While moving through the area, he glanced at luxury brands scattered across the floor. Items that once held high value now meant nothing. Releasing a wave of mana to clear the path, he guessed that food would be stored on the lower level, so he planned to gather anything useful on the way down. He walked slowly toward a sign, then looked down and spotted a shelf filled with fruits. Upon closer inspection, he noticed that much of the food had spoiled. With a look of mild disgust, he pushed aside several bags, remarking to himself that he wouldn't eat any of it regardless of the situation. Eventually, he found one bag in usable condition and picked it up with a satisfied grin, concluding it would suffice for the others. Later, Jong arrived near a bunker. Inside, one of the residents observed him through the window. The man commented to his partner that the snowmobile gave Jong a significant advantage in moving across the terrain. If they had such a vehicle, they could finally gather their own supplies and escape this struggle. His partner called the vehicle an electric sled, but the man dismissed the term, insisting it did not matter what it was as long as it helped eliminate Jong. Jong looked up at the building, realizing that his greatest asset, the snowmobile, was also what made him a target. The others would envy and eventually turn on him. Fortunately, he now had weapons to defend himself. Elsewhere, Uncle Yu clenched his fists, noting that Jong had prepared well. As Jong climbed through a broken window, he stated that supplies were scarce. He had searched every nearby supermarket without much success. Holding up the bags, he declared that it had taken significant effort to secure what little he had found for the people. Jong crouched low, shifting through the gathered supplies while Uncle Yu stood nearby, waving his hand and offering praise to Jong. Jong remained silent for a moment, lips pressed together as he scanned the crowd. Hearing the noise from the street, his expression hardened. He raised his voice, stating clearly that although he had collected the food, it was not meant for those unwilling to contribute. The people gathered outside pointed toward the lobby, demanding the food be handed over. In response, Jong raised a finger and grinned coldly. He declared that anyone who killed an enemy would earn their share. The crowd fell silent at first, stunned by the terms. Then, their expressions twisted with desperation. Several individuals leapt up from their seats, eyes wide with madness, while the group outside hesitated in disbelief. Within moments, chaos erupted. The groups clashed violently, each person driven by hunger and the promise of reward. The shouts grew louder as more participants pushed forward, desperate to kill and claim the food. From a distance, Jong and Jong observed the frenzy without interfering. Uncle Yu raised his hand and gave a sharp command to press the attack, urging their side forward with confidence in their numbers. An axe clattered to the ground, slipping from the hands of a wounded man. Those still fighting turned and saw his lifeless body, blood spreading across the floor. Fear swept through the attackers, and panic set in. One by one, they began to retreat, running back the way they came. The defenders erupted into cheers, raising their weapons and celebrating their success. It was finally time to eat. Jong remained still, her face pale. Despite the victory, her eyes remained fixed on the injured. She shook her head slowly, realizing that their lives could still be saved, though not easily. Medical supplies and proper treatment were required, things Jong would never waste on those he deemed unnecessary. Later, everyone gathered in the main lobby. Jong clapped his hands once, praising their efforts with a calm and steady voice. He spread his arms, addressing the group. Through his words, he reminded them that unity made them strong. When they worked together, no threat could overwhelm them. He gestured toward a few men in the crowd, calling them forward. Smiling, he handed out rations and tapped each of them on the shoulder, promising more rewards for maintaining order. As he turned back to face the crowd, Jong silently acknowledged what he had known from the beginning. Hunger could drive people to do anything. Looking out from beneath lowered brows, he recognized that this was the foundation of control he needed. Raising his hand again, he beckoned the rest to come forward and collect their food. Jong held a gun in one hand while placing food into a woman's hands with the other. Scanning the crowd, he smirked at the thought that effort dictated reward. Those who wanted to eat needed to work for it. Facing forward, Jong called out the next name, Shu Hao. Before anyone moved, the man dropped to his knees, demanding to know where his food was. Without hesitation, Jong glanced down and swung his leg, kicking an object across the floor. It slid toward Shu Hao, revealing itself as a single candy. Jong pointed at it, stating that it was his share. Shu Hao picked it up, his grip tightening as he questioned why he received so little. Jong remained calm, accusing him of hiding while others fought. Laughter broke out among the crowd as Jong declared the candy a gift born of his generosity. Shu Hao protested, claiming he had no chance to contribute since everything ended before he could act. Jong shook his finger in response, stating that only the result mattered. The process held no weight. The man then raised his voice, accusing Jong of being unfair and biased. In response, Jong stepped closer, locking eyes with him and asking if he truly wished to question authority. Before Shu Hao could reply, residents pushed him to the ground. Jong approached, asserting that defiance warranted punishment. He pointed his weapon forward, warning that disobedience would be met with the same treatment. A few men kicked Shu Hao as Jong addressed the rest, stating clearly that anyone who disagreed was free to leave. After a short pause, Jong patted one of the boys nearby and said he believed the message had been received. Shu Hao glared upward, accusing him of being a liar. Jong stepped forward again, pressing his boot against Shu Hao's hand. He grabbed him by the hair, lifting his head and expressing hope for better behavior in the future. Raising his thumb, he turned it downward and declared that useless people had no place among them. Jong turned his back and announced that the distribution was complete. The remaining supplies would be stored. From the crowd, a boy's voice cried out in disappointment, claiming he had received nothing. Yu Qing collapsed to the ground, pleading emotionally and saying Jong was someone she loved, confident he would not harm her. Her friend, Kai Ning, also stepped forward, asking not to be forgotten. Jong crouched in front of them with a composed expression. He assured them they had not been forgotten. However, he then added, with a smirk, that there had never been food allocated for them in the first place. At once, both girls' expressions shifted, stunned by his words. Yu Qing and Kai Ning frowned, their expressions sharp as they questioned why Jong had singled them out. Yu Qing began to cry, asking whether his earlier words of love had meant nothing. Jong responded by striking her across the face, accusing her of taking his words too seriously. Observing her tears, he stated coldly that she had been using him and informed her that he now had someone else. Jo Kei stepped forward and hugged him while Jong instructed her not to cause trouble in the future. Yu Qing clutched her head in disbelief, shouting that Jong had once asked her to stay with him. She demanded an explanation for his sudden change of heart. Without hesitation, Jong turned to the crowd and called out to Shu Hao, asking what others usually called her. Shu Hao loudly declared that Yu Qing was known as a woman desperate for a wealthy heir. Laughter erupted among the people. Yu Qing wept harder and shouted at everyone to stop. Overwhelmed, she ran out of the building. Jong tossed a candy to Shu Hao as a reward. The surrounding men lifted Shu Hao by his arms and followed Yu Qing outside. Folding his arms, Jong declared that with the trash gone, it was time to focus on defense. He reminded them that 47 people remained in the building, not including the children. Jo Kei joined Uncle Yu and Li Mei, stating that those three would remain independent. The others would be divided into groups of 7 to 8, each responsible for shifts to defend the building from potential threats. Jong moved toward the stairs and explained that anyone who spotted an intruder should strike the railing to alert the others. He smiled while announcing the reward system. Every 5 kills would earn food. On-duty personnel would rely only on what they already possessed. Jong placed a hand on Uncle Yu's shoulder and assigned him to oversee the system. Outside, the blizzard raged. Holding food, Chu asked what the situation beyond their building looked like. Jong studied the screen on a nearby tablet and replied that snowfall had brought the entire city to a standstill. Low-rise structures had vanished under layers of snow. Placing the tablet on the table, Jong mentioned that even if the snow stopped and temperatures rose, it would take at least half a month to melt the snow. Chu pointed out that winter was only beginning and conditions would worsen. Jong rose from the sofa, stepped back, and dropped the weapon from his hands. Stretching his arms, he claimed that none of it posed a problem for them. He crouched and picked up a sniper rifle, stating that no one could reach them, even during the worst conditions. Holding the weapon, Jong emphasized that the greatest threat was no longer the weather but the desperate people still out there. Stepping onto the balcony, Jong lifted the rifle and scanned the white landscape through its scope. A few distant shapes stood out in the blizzard. He narrowed his eyes, realizing someone was already aiming at his snowmobile. Jong frowned while observing the situation from the balcony. The bait he had set with the garage had worked exactly as planned. There was no doubt the intruder would be furious with what he had found. His phone vibrated with an incoming call. Uncle Yu's cheerful voice came through, informing him that he had managed to pick up some noodles. Jong leaned back and asked Li Mei not to be upset, though her silence made her feelings clear. He then questioned why Uncle Yu was being so polite, pointing out that there was no obligation between them. Removing his jacket, Jong asked whether Uncle Yu was truly ready to raise another man's child. Uncle Yu responded that none of that mattered anymore, since he considered himself fortunate to have found a woman like Li Mei. While Zhou Kai massaged his shoulders, Jong remarked that Uncle Yu often underestimated his worth. A man like him, in reality, was a rare treasure. After biting into a piece of chicken, Jong added that Li Mei was also a blessing, particularly since there had been no wedding costs. Uncle Yu laughed, saying the child was enough for him, and asked Jong once more not to be upset with his wife. Jong replied with a calm voice, stating that he held respect for both of them. Uncle Yu smiled, slightly embarrassed, and reminded Jong he was always welcome to call. Jong then gently stroked Zhou Kai's face and whispered that some things should not be rushed. Their conversation came to a quiet halt as they fell into a passionate kiss. Meanwhile, a group of masked men crept carefully into the building's lobby. They moved slowly toward the stairs, scanning every corner. Suddenly, a brick fell dangerously close to one of them. Reacting fast, he swung his stick and smashed the brick into 2 pieces. Above, a resident shouted loudly while waving another brick, warning everyone that they were under attack. The call to arms rang clear. Those who had eaten needed to step forward and defend the building. One of the attackers clenched his fists, swearing they needed to find and kill whoever had exposed their plan. It surprised him that the defenders had already prepared so thoroughly. As the assailants charged up the stairs, a violent clash broke out. The tide turned quickly. One of the intruders, seeing his wounded partner behind him, screamed in panic and ordered a retreat. The defenders watched the enemies flee into the snowstorm, concluding that pursuit would be too risky. Jong yawned as he stepped outside, noting that another wave of desperate scavengers had tried their luck again. He then pointed toward the fleeing figures in the distance, casually asking whether his sniper rifle could reach them from that far. Jong raised his palm and activated the firearm. Pointing it forward, he decided it was time to test the weapon's functionality. Peering through the scope, he immediately spotted a target in the distance. The magnification impressed him. Even something as small as an insect would have been visible. Without hesitation, his finger tightened around the trigger. The shot rang out sharply. The bullet struck the enemy's head, dropping him instantly. From below, voices rose in confusion, questioning if someone had actually been shot. Jong grinned quietly to himself, confident in his aim. Panic spread among the intruders as they realized what had happened. They turned and fled from the building. Jong continued watching through the scope. Before the enhanced vision wore off, he decided to use it again. Another bullet tore through a second attacker's forehead. He quickly reloaded, sending a round directly into the heart of a third enemy. A fourth tried to flee, but Jong's next shot caught him in the back. Spent shell casings surrounded his feet, yet his expression remained calm. With a smirk, he raised the weapon once more, realizing he no longer needed to leave the safety of the building to eliminate threats. Observers outside had already drawn their conclusions. The shot had clearly come from above, and there was no doubt it had been Jong. They quietly agreed it would be wise to stay on his good side if they wanted to survive. The noise had spread far beyond the immediate area. Jong scanned his surroundings, understanding that his actions had disrupted many. By the next morning, a sense of unease would settle over the survivors, robbing them of sleep. At sunrise, Zhou Kai approached with a plate of food in her hands. She admitted that her cooking was not as refined as it had been at the restaurant and hoped Jong would not be too harsh in judgment. He picked up his chopsticks and told her there was no rush. With time, her cooking would improve. He added that living on instant noodles alone would become dull, so a varied diet was necessary. Zhou Kai sat beside him on the couch, visibly eager. She mentioned hearing gunfire the previous night and asked if he had been the one responsible. Jong confirmed he had taken down 7 enemies using the sniper rifle. She reacted with admiration, covering her face with her hands in awe. He then asked if she was curious about why he used that particular weapon. Zhou Kai smiled and said that the details did not matter. What mattered was that they were still alive, unlike their enemies. Jong placed the plate down and acknowledged her wisdom, pleased by her lack of unnecessary questions. Elsewhere, on the balcony of Building 26, a nervous man turned to his leader. He asked what they should do next, pointing out that several members were dead and more than half of their group had vanished. The leader narrowed his eyes, clearly displeased. He muttered that the enemy had access to weapons. His companion reminded him that without Jong's snowmobile and the supplies he had taken, they only had enough food to last a few more days. Frustrated, the man clenched his jaw and ordered for Daisy's corpse to be brought in that evening. Meanwhile, Jong walked down the corridor, briefly instructing a nearby worker to continue his task. The people around him watched in silence, fearful of attracting unwanted attention. They understood clearly that survival in this building depended on staying far from conflict with Jong. Inserting an earpiece, Jong mounted his snowmobile. He thanked Uncle Yu for the timely information, then requested that a group be organized to watch over their building. Uncle Yu assured him that he would protect the place with his life if necessary. Onlookers in Building 21 peered out of their windows, observing Jong's departure. One man wondered aloud where Jong could be hiding the snowmobile, mentioning that a search of the garage the previous day had revealed nothing. Another speculated that the area was large enough to conceal it well, which explained why Jong remained difficult to track. The local leader, narrowing his gaze, declared that the snowmobile should belong to them. Gripping a machete, he reasoned that with such a vehicle, they could travel for supplies, making it easier to expand their ranks. With growing agitation, he muttered that he needed to find cigarettes soon. It had been over 2 weeks without one, and the craving was pushing him toward the edge. Jong continued toward a building, steering the snowmobile with care. Glancing to the side, he considered the dwindling number of large supermarkets. His thoughts shifted to the southern base. Although he had already emptied the main warehouse, he suspected there could still be usable materials left behind. Restarting the snowmobile, Jong headed toward the food depot. He knew this place had once been a primary distribution hub. If there were still items inside, he could secure enough resources to support hundreds, possibly even 1,000 people. Upon arrival, Jong used a stick to break the glass window and looked inside. The most accessible goods were long gone. He lowered a rope and quickly descended into the interior, his mana activating around him. A quick scan confirmed his suspicion: there was nothing edible in sight. Scratching the back of his head in mild embarrassment, Jong admitted to himself that the location might still prove useful in the future. He bit into a piece of old supplies, then reflected on his frequent snowmobile use. Fuel reserves were likely running low. Climbing back on, he decided that his next stop must be a gas station. Upon reaching one, he kicked the pump in frustration. There was barely any fuel left. Running a hand through his hair, Jong looked around with concern. He questioned whether any other refueling options even remained. Jong dropped into a snowdrift, muttering about the need to conserve fuel. He raised his hand, scanning the empty surroundings. Few people remained, and it was unfortunate that larger excavation equipment could not be used freely. His eyes widened with a sudden thought. Digging through the snow might actually work. Rising to his feet, Jong observed that the snow had fallen less than a month ago. Nothing had fully frozen yet, so there was still a chance. Beside him stood an excavator. He activated the machine and noted that the snow had piled up to nearly 10 meters. This depth made it possible to uncover entrances buried below. After refueling the equipment, Jong prepared to begin. He climbed into the cabin, confident in his ability. He had already operated similar machinery back at the warehouse, so there would be no difficulty now. On the way to the gas station, he assured himself it would not take much time. Lowering the bucket, Jong began scooping up snow. His expression remained calm, a slight smile appearing as the machine moved efficiently. Eventually, he reached the entrance and stood silently in front of it. He acknowledged that doing this by hand would have likely cost him his life. He entered the site, recalling that fuel storage was usually located underground. It was worth checking. Using a metal stick, he pushed against the door and applied force. The door creaked open slowly. With a flashlight in hand, Jong descended cautiously. Illuminating the space, he discovered 3 large gasoline storage barrels. Approaching one of them, he unscrewed a small opening. After covering it with film and sealing it with care, he secured the line. A smile formed across his face. Descending farther, Jong extended his arms and grinned with satisfaction. If entering this facility had been this smooth, then all its contents likely belonged to him now. The remnants of a frozen civilization lay at his feet, buried beneath layers of snow. Night had already fallen. Flashlight in hand, Jong surveyed the room once more. He had secured fuel and supplies, which meant he could finally rest without worry. Outside, he squatted near the tent's entrance and considered tomorrow's destination, the location Uncle Yu had mentioned. After zipping up his sleeping bag, he fell asleep swiftly. Elsewhere, Jo-Kei sat before a child while the mother beside her explained that the boy had remained in this condition for 2 days. She asked if anything could still be done. Jo-Kei sighed, aware that Jong had left enough food behind, but unfortunately, he had taken all the medicine with him. Uncle Yu approached quietly. He placed a reassuring hand on the mother's shoulder and revealed that he had found a few remaining supplies. With a steady voice, he promised that Jong would return soon, and everything would turn out fine. A few hours later, the mother lifted her child into her arms, expressing gratitude to Jo K and Uncle Yu. She admitted she could not imagine what would have happened without their help. Jo K placed the bag over the woman's shoulder, explaining that the medicine had come from Jong, so he deserved the thanks. With that, Jo K and Uncle Yu turned toward the exit. Without warning, someone rushed past them. Aunt Lin appeared suddenly, knife raised high. Screaming that her grandson had died, she declared the mother should suffer the same. Her blade plunged into the woman's neck with full force. As the mother collapsed, Jo K reacted swiftly, catching the child before he hit the ground. The dying woman whispered for her to take the child and run. Lin turned her glare toward Jo K, demanding the baby back. Jo K shielded the infant, noting that he was about the same age as Lin's grandson. The old woman shrieked that since her own grandchild had perished, this one should not survive either. Jo K spun around and sprinted up the stairs. Lin lunged forward with surprising speed, managing to grab Jo K's leg. The girl lost balance and fell, the baby still clutched in her arms. Lin loomed over her, raging that Jo K had failed to save her grandson and would now pay for it. Jo K shut her eyes and shielded the baby, bracing herself. A heavy thud echoed through the corridor. Uncle Yu stood between them, having pushed Lin away from Jo K. He turned to check if the child was unharmed and asked whether Lin had managed to injure her. Jo K confirmed they were both fine. Uncle Yu exhaled, revealing he had no idea what he would have told Jong if something had happened to her. Jo K admitted she shared some of the blame. She had underestimated how long Lin could last without food. The old woman spun around, calling Uncle Yu a coward and accusing him of fearing death. She declared that everyone shared responsibility for her grandson's death and should pay for it with their lives. Hugging her own body, she continued to scream at the top of her lungs. Uncle Yu stepped closer and shouted back. Jong had saved everyone from hell. Without him, none of them would be alive. He ordered Lin to keep quiet. Jo K crouched beside the old woman and asked her to stop blaming her for the lack of medicine. Lin's face twisted with rage. She screamed that her grandson had died because Jong refused to help. Jo K's expression darkened. She told Lin that she had pleaded with Jong to hand over medicine. However, by the time she reached the boy, it had been too late. Lin rolled on the floor in hysterics, shouting that it had not been her fault. Several others had gathered by then, drawn by the commotion. Someone in the crowd asked if Lin had actually killed her grandson or had only been tormenting him the whole time. A young man scoffed, saying Lin had done enough harm already and likely wouldn't survive much longer. He struck a lighter, adding that Lin was fat and they had not eaten in days. The lantern flared to life, casting a harsh glow across the room. At that moment, Jong opened the tent flap. His voice cut through the tension, stating that it was time to move toward the military camp. Jong scratched his head, trying to confirm if this was the location Uncle Yu had mentioned. Placing his hands on his hips, he noted that his past experience would make the process quicker. After unearthing the entrance, he assumed the armory must be nearby. Once inside, Jong surveyed the surroundings. The area appeared distant and secure, although something felt off. Lighting one of the rooms, he questioned the absence of any people. Puzzled, he considered whether they had already evacuated. A new thought struck him: perhaps someone had foreseen the collapse and taken all the ammunition in advance. He theorized that these people might simply be in hiding, waiting for the right time to re-establish order in this new world. Climbing onto an excavator, Jong grew more alert, realizing that a group armed with such foresight could pose a significant threat. He concluded that preparation was essential. The excavator quickly cleared the debris. Looking around, Jong noticed the place differed from what he had imagined. Descending deeper, he began inspecting the storage. Several boxes caught his eye. Inside were weapons, cartridges, sniper rifles, and even grenades. A sense of satisfaction passed through him as he examined the contents. It was clear most of the supplies had already been taken, judging by the empty spaces and scattered remains. Even so, the find was not disappointing. Jong climbed onto a snowmobile, feeling he had gathered enough for now. If more was needed, he could return to similar locations in the future. Back at the building, several villagers approached and questioned why he had returned empty-handed. Jong raised his arms in a gesture of helplessness. He explained that he had explored numerous places but found nothing new and advised them to remain patient. The villagers began to grumble. They complained of hunger and argued that despite their hard work, they were still being denied results. Jong responded with a grin and asked if they had finished venting their frustration. The tone of his voice caused them to step back in fear. He reminded them sternly of who had saved them. It had only been a few days since their agreement, yet they were already becoming disrespectful. The arrangement would revert to its original state, they would gather food on their own. One man extended his hand nervously, assuring Jong that there had been a misunderstanding. He acknowledged the difficulty of scavenging under such harsh conditions. To ease the tension, he suggested Jong take some rest before continuing the search. Jong turned away from the group and announced that they were dismissed for the day. One of the tenants narrowed his eyes, masking his resentment behind a polite expression. In his mind, Jong was shameless. After everything they had done, this was how he repaid them, cold and detached. As the man offered to accompany Jong outside, he hid a knife behind his back. He mentioned that the snowmobile had enough room for 3 people. Another tenant stepped forward with a friendly grin, echoing the sentiment. They all insisted that they simply wanted to help. Jong remained motionless as he reached into his pocket and calmly pulled out a handgun. His voice was even as he apologized, not for what he was about to do, but as a formality. He then shot the man carrying the knife in the head without hesitation. The body dropped instantly. Jong kept his gun raised. He stated that he had never trusted anything they had said. Turning slightly, he aimed at another person in the group. His tone was flat as he explained that their obedience had decayed. They had been spoiled by the leniency he once allowed. Sparing them now would only encourage deeper insubordination. With a few more pulls of the trigger, Jong ended the lives of several tenants. Their bodies crumpled one after another. The rest of the group scattered or dropped to their knees, finally recognizing that he had never been one to tolerate betrayal. Once the silence returned, Jong holstered his weapon and walked away from the blood-stained floor. Dr. Jo K approached him cautiously. She asked how long he had been gone, her eyes scanning his frame for injuries. Jong responded with a calm expression, assuring her that he had received only minor scratches. As he closed his eyes, he reflected aloud that he had always been a kind person. That kindness, he claimed, was the reason he had chosen to forgive them, before retracting it with bullets. He lifted his hands and announced it was time to head back. Li Mei watched him in silence. Her thoughts contradicted his words. There was nothing kind in his actions. No forgiveness, only control and cold logic. Jong rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Most of the preparations had already been completed. The expendable labor force remained large enough to carry out the rest. In fact, reducing their numbers would only make the group more efficient. There was no room left for those who challenged his rule. Later, while resting on the couch, he turned to the girl and asked about what had taken place during his absence. She hesitated briefly before reporting that Aunt Lin had attempted to kill the child's mother. The attempt had failed, and Lin had faced consequences as a result. Jo K then informed him that Lin Gyu from Building 9 had reached out. She wanted him to consider entering a negotiation. Jong's expression hardened. He asked what was left to negotiate. Jo K stood quietly before Jong, her lips slightly parted as she explained the situation. According to her, the connection between herself and Lin Gyu was strictly professional. There had never been anything personal between them. Lin Gyu and her group had shown an eagerness to negotiate, although they insisted that any real conversation had to happen with Jong directly. They had refused to disclose the details to anyone else. Jong listened without shifting his gaze. His response was firm. He had no interest in negotiating with people who, in his eyes, had nothing of value left. Their situation was collapsing, and all they could do now was wait for the inevitable. He had no intention of depending on them or acknowledging their plea. Jo K hesitated before asking if she should deliver his refusal. Rather than answering immediately, Jong rested his head against his palm and told her to provide a detailed account of everything she knew about Building 9 and those who lived there. Jo K began speaking about Lin Gyu, who apparently led a cosmetics company once valued at $200 million. However, behind its glamour, the company had operated as a pyramid scheme. Lin Gyu was estimated to be around 40 years old. Despite her age, she maintained a youthful appearance and a commanding presence. Her leadership had proven effective. Under her rule, Building 9 had suffered fewer losses than most, with casualties remaining around 10. As she massaged Jong's leg, Jo K continued. According to her sources, Lin Gyu had assumed a strong leadership position in her building. It wasn't just about resources, she had gained the loyalty of her people. Jong glanced at his hand as she spoke, reflecting on how, in desperate times, even a woman could seize control. That fact alone implied that Lin Gyu had more to her than appearances suggested. Jo Kei looked up and asked if he truly intended to meet her. Jong replied that observing the situation directly was necessary. Understanding the other side was part of survival. He picked up his phone, noting that it was time to gain insight into what others were planning. Upon opening his app, he found 2 friend requests, one from Lin Gyu, the other from someone named Li Jian. He accepted both without hesitation. The second name stirred something in his memory. Li Jian sounded familiar, though he could not place the connection just yet. A small smile formed as he realized that this individual might prove useful later. Scrolling through the messages, Jong saw that Lin Gyu had sent a brief note suggesting they switch to a phone call. She claimed it would be better than using text. Jong typed a response, telling her that if she had anything worth saying, she should speak clearly and directly. On the other end, Lin Gyu sat with her phone, her thoughts spinning. She recalled the stories about Jong, how he had allegedly killed countless people. Rumors also suggested he possessed both a snowmobile and a sniper rifle. That combination made him more dangerous than most. Her expression turned cautious. She reminded herself not to underestimate him. After a moment's hesitation, she bit her lip and typed again. Her message said she had admired him for a long time and hoped they would meet soon. She mentioned knowing about his snowmobile and suggested that cooperation during supply runs could be mutually beneficial. Jong read the message without reacting. He asked what she could possibly offer him in return. Her answer came swiftly. They had manpower. She claimed they could work and assist with gathering resources. Jong scratched his cheek. Her pushy tone didn't sit well with him. She seemed too confident, perhaps believing he could be easily manipulated. The idea annoyed him. He continued reading until one line made him pause. She stated that he likely understood how others felt about him. That remark caused his eyes to narrow. There was something layered behind those words, something veiled. It wasn't just a comment about reputation. It was a warning, perhaps even a threat. Lifting the phone to his mouth, Jong asked her directly if she was implying an attack would follow if he refused to cooperate. Lin Gyu responded calmly, stating that it would not come to that. According to her, the best solution was for all groups to stand united. Fighting each other would only hasten their downfall. Jong gave a faint smile. She was the first person in a while to speak with such bold confidence. He admitted, perhaps to himself, that he would consider the offer before making a final decision. He turned to the window and studied the bleak exterior. The thought of a united front against him was troubling. If all the other buildings combined their strength, resistance would be almost impossible. No matter how well armed he was, numbers could overwhelm preparation.